Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. It was one of those late October days where the air gets that sharp bite to it. The kind that warns you winter isn't just coming, it's practically on your doorstep. My friend and I had decided, maybe stupidly, to get one last good hike in before the snow started falling for real up in the Sierra Nevada. We were on the east side, not far from the lake, in an area that's rugged but not completely off the map. We'd been on this particular trail a handful of times before. It felt familiar, like an old jacket. The plan was simple. Start around 9 in the morning, make our way up to this ridge that overlooks a small, unnamed valley, eat our sandwiches, and be back at the car by 4:30 at the latest. The sun was already dipping low, and that long, cold shadow time of the afternoon was setting in. The light turns this weird, flat gold, and everything gets quiet. I remember that specifically, the quiet. It wasn't the normal, peaceful quiet of the woods. It was a heavy quiet, the kind that feels like it's pressing down on your ears. We were maybe an hour from the trailhead, just starting to switch back down into the thicker pines, when I first felt it. It's hard to explain, but it was a feeling of being watched, not like a deer or a squirrel was looking at you, but something more. It was a solid, conscious weight. I remember stopping mid-step and just scanning the trees. My friend, he stopped a few paces ahead and looked back at me. "You good?" he asked, his voice low, like he felt it too and didn't want to disturb whatever was causing it. I just nodded and waved him on. "Yeah, just a stitch in my side," I lied. We kept walking, but the feeling didn't go away. It got worse. It was like an itch right between my shoulder blades, the kind you can't scratch. My skin was crawling. I kept glancing over my shoulder, peering into the shadows between the Jeffrey pines. Everything looked normal, just trees, rocks, fallen logs. But the feeling was so intense, it was making my heart thump in a weird, uneven rhythm. That's when I saw movement, off to our left, maybe 60, 70 yards away, up the steep slope we were descending parallel to. It wasn't the fluid movement of a deer. It was bigger, slower, more deliberate. I grabbed my friend's arm and pointed, my mouth suddenly too dry to speak, and then it just stepped out from behind a big sugar pine. I swear my heart just stopped, completely froze in my chest for a second. It was tall, so damn tall, 7 feet easy, maybe more. And it was built. Not like a bodybuilder, but like a powerlifter or a gorilla, just pure, dense muscle under this thick coat of hair. The hair, it wasn't black or brown like you see in the blurry photos. It was this dry, dusty color, the exact shade of the pine needles covering the forest floor. It blended in so perfectly it was terrifying. Like the forest itself had just stood up. It was just standing there, facing us. It wasn't hunched over like an ape. It was upright. Its long arms hanging down, its hands just there. I remember its feet. It was barefoot, standing on the rocky, steep incline like it was nothing. Its feet were wide, really wide, and dark, almost black against the pale dirt. But the worst part, the part that still gets me, was its face. It turned its head and looked right at us. And it was calm. Its eyes, they were this deep, intelligent brown. There was no aggression there, no fear, no curiosity even. It was just a look, a recognition. It felt like it was looking right through my eyes and into the part of my brain that was screaming. It knew we were terrified, and it just acknowledged it. That silent understanding, that weird, impossible moment of connection was more frightening than any roar or charge could ever have been. We were frozen. Just 2 statues on a dirt path, staring at this thing that shouldn't exist. I could hear my own blood pulsing in my ears. My friend's breathing was a shallow, ragged sound next to me. Then it moved. It turned away from us and started walking up the slope, not across, but straight up. The ground there was maybe a 45-degree angle, littered with loose shale and gravel, stuff I'd slip and bust my ass on even with my best hiking boots. This thing just walked. Its bare feet found purchase where there shouldn't have been any. It didn't scramble. It didn't use its hands. It just ascended. It was the most effortless, powerful movement I have ever seen. It moved like gravity was a suggestion it had chosen to ignore. I remember the way its shoulder muscles rolled under that pine needle-colored hair, the quiet, solid thump of its feet on the earth. There was no sound of sliding rock. Nothing. It reached the top of that little rise and disappeared into the trees. The spell broke. I sucked in a huge, gasping breath, like I'd been holding it the whole time. My legs felt like jelly. I looked at my friend, and his face was pure white, his eyes wide and unblinking. "We need to go." "Now," he whispered, his voice tight. But we didn't move. We just stood there listening. The forest was still that heavy, oppressive quiet. And then we heard a single, heavy footfall off to our right, further down the trail, the direction we needed to go. My friend shook his head, a frantic little motion. No, 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 it was paralleling us. The trail curved down through the valley, and this thing was moving through the woods, keeping pace with us, staying just out of sight. We could hear it. Not constantly, but every now and then, the snap of a twig that was too loud to be a squirrel, the rustle of branches that was too substantial. It was herding us, or maybe just observing. I don't know. But the feeling of being stalked, of being studied by something that was clearly so much more powerful and at home in that environment than we were, was absolutely paralyzing. We started walking again, but it was this stiff, hurried shuffle. We weren't talking. There was nothing to say. Every few seconds, one of us would glance to the side, trying to catch a glimpse through the trees. We never saw it, but we knew it was there. The feeling of being watched was a physical pressure now, a cold hand on the back of my neck. The trail opened up into a small, rocky clearing with a massive granite boulder in the middle of it, about the size of a small car. And there it was. It was sitting on top of the boulder. It was just waiting for us. It had gotten ahead of us. It had moved through that dense, steep terrain faster than we could walk on a cleared path. It was sitting with its knees drawn up, its long arms resting on them. Its posture was almost thoughtful. It watched us approach, its head tilted slightly, that same calm, intelligent gaze. It was so close now, maybe 30 yards. I could see the texture of its hair, the way the late afternoon sun caught the lighter tips. I could see the sheer bulk of it. I could smell it. It's a smell that stuck with me. It wasn't a gross smell, not like rot or poop. It was musky, earthy, like wet dirt and old leaves and something else, something wild and animal and old, really, really old. A switch flipped in my head. The fear curdled into something else, something raw and panicked and stupid. I don't know why I did it. It was pure, dumb instinct. I stepped forward, away from my friend, and I yelled. I screamed at it. It wasn't words, not really. It was just a loud, harsh, guttural sound. A challenge ripped from the deepest, most primitive part of my fear. The sound echoed in the clearing and then died, swallowed by that heavy silence. The creature didn't startle. It didn't flinch. It didn't growl. It just looked at me. Its eyes narrowed just a fraction, that was all. That tiny, almost imperceptible change in its expression was more terrifying than any reaction I could have imagined. It was a look of assessment, like it was recalculating what I was. In that moment, I felt smaller than I have ever felt in my entire life. I was an insect that had just chirped at a boot. My friend was on me in a second, grabbing my arm, his fingers digging in hard. "What are you doing? Are you insane?" he hissed, his voice cracking with terror. "We need to leave, now. Don't look at it, just walk. Don't run, just walk." He pulled me and I let him. My legs were shaking so bad I could barely stay upright. We walked past the boulder. I could feel its eyes on the side of my face. I didn't turn my head. I didn't dare. I just stared straight ahead at the path, at my feet, at the dirt. Every cell in my body was screaming that it was right behind me, that it was about to reach out and grab me. We walked like that for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 5 minutes. The trail curved and the boulder disappeared from view behind us. The second it was out of sight, my friend's walk turned into a frantic, stumbling jog. We didn't speak. We just moved, our backpacks slapping against us, our breath coming in ragged, sobbing gasps. We didn't stop to look back. We didn't stop for anything. We hit the final straightaway to the trailhead, a flat, open stretch, and we just ran. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs felt like they were going to give out. We didn't stop until we were at the car, fumbling with the keys, scrambling inside and locking the doors. We sat there for a long time, just breathing, staring out the windshield at the darkening forest. Neither of us said a word. What was there to say? We had just seen something that wasn't supposed to be real. We had looked into the eyes of a myth, and the myth had looked back with a calm, unsettling intelligence. We never reported it, not to the park rangers, not to any Bigfoot research group. Nothing. The thought of someone going up there with a rifle, of some trophy hunter trying to bag it, it made me feel sick. The terror of that day was mixed with this profound, humbling awe. That thing, whatever it was, wasn't a monster. It was just there. It was a part of that place in a way we could never be. It belonged. We were the visitors. We were the interlopers. The drive home was silent. We went our separate ways with a nod, and we haven't really talked about it since. It's one of those things that sits between you, too big and too weird to put into words, but I think about it all the time. I think about the way it walked up that slope like it was nothing. I think about the smell of damp earth and old trees, and most of all, I think about its eyes, that calm, knowing gaze. It wasn't a look of anger or malice. It was a look that said it understood exactly what we were, and it had decided to let us go, and that's the part that still keeps me up at night. The question of why. Story 2. Okay, I'll just get this out. I've been putting it off for weeks, but I can't sleep again, and typing it out might, I don't know, get it out of my head. Maybe someone here will believe me, or at least not think I'm completely insane. This happened on a Saturday in early October, last month. The air was just starting to get that crisp bite to it, the kind that makes you feel alive. The leaves in the Black Hut management area here in Glendale were turning all these insane colors, reds and oranges and yellows. It was a perfect day, one of those days you just want to bottle up and keep. I decided to take my mountain bike out. I do that a lot. It's my thing, my way to decompress from the week. I brought my dog Rex. He's a mutt. Part German Shepherd, part who knows what, a big, goofy, loyal guy. He loves these trips more than I do. The second I pull out the bike rack, he's spinning in circles by the front door, whining with excitement. That day was no different. He was practically vibrating in the passenger seat the whole drive over. We got to the trailhead around 10 in the morning. The parking lot was empty, which was a little unusual for a nice Saturday, but I didn't think much of it. More trail for us. I got my bike off the rack, tightened my helmet, and Rex was already off, sniffing at a tree, tail wagging like a metronome. We started off down the main fire road. The sun was filtering through the canopy, making these long, shifting patterns on the ground. The only sounds were the crunch of my tires on the gravel, the whir of the chain, and Rex's panting as he trotted alongside me. We'd been out for maybe 45 minutes, an hour tops. I'd turned off onto one of the narrower single-track trails, the kind that twists and turns through thicker woods. It's more technical, more fun. I was in the zone, focused on the path ahead, dodging roots and rocks. Rex was a little ways ahead of me, but I could still hear him crashing through the undergrowth. He's not a quiet dog. Then he just stopped. He was about 20 feet ahead of me, frozen in the middle of the trail. His head was cocked, ears pricked forward, and his whole body was rigid. His tail wasn't wagging anymore. It was stuck straight out, stiff. I slowed down, coasting to a stop a few feet behind him. "What's up, buddy?" I said, my voice sounding too loud in the sudden quiet. He didn't look back at me. He was staring intently into the woods to our right. I followed his gaze. At first, I didn't see anything, just trees, ferns, the usual mess of the forest. The light was dimmer here, the trees crowding closer together. Then my eyes focused, and my brain just stuttered. Maybe 30, 40 yards off the trail, there was something squatting down with its back to me. My first stupid thought was that it was a guy in a weird, dirty snowsuit. But it was October, and it wasn't a suit. The color was this grimy, off-white, almost a light gray, like old concrete or a sheep that's been rolling in mud. It was matted, looked thick. It was just crouched there, perfectly still. It had these huge, rounded shoulders, and I could see the shape of its back, broad and powerful looking. It didn't look human. The proportions were wrong. It was too broad, too thick. It looked like an ape, like a gorilla, but leaner, and the color was all wrong for a gorilla. My heart, which had been thumping from the exercise, just seized up. It felt like a cold fist had closed around my chest. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. I was just staring at this thing, my brain screaming at me that this wasn't right, this shouldn't be here, this isn't possible. Rex was still frozen. He wasn't growling. He wasn't barking. He was just locked on it. That was the weirdest part. If it was a bear, a person, a deer, anything, he'd be barking his head off, or at least whining. This was a silent, tense alert. It was like he was confused or intimidated. That scared me more than the thing itself. Then it stood up. It didn't unfold slowly. It didn't turn around. It just rose. It was so fast, so fluid, like it was on springs. 1 second it was a crouching shape, the next it was towering, and it was tall. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing from that distance looked to be my height, or maybe even a little taller, but the sheer mass of it was what hit me. It was massive, broad shoulders, a thick torso, long arms that hung down past its knees. It still hadn't looked at me. It was just standing there, profiled to me for a split second, and then it took a step and vanished. It didn't run. It just stepped behind a thick cluster of pine trees and was gone. There was no sound, no crack of a twig, no rustle of leaves. Nothing. It was as if the woods had just swallowed it whole. The silence that followed was heavier and more terrifying than the sight of the thing. It was a dead, watchful silence. My ears were ringing with it. I realized I was holding my breath, and I let it out in a ragged gasp. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat, a frantic, painful pounding. I could actually hear it, a whooshing, thumping sound in my ears. "Rex," I whispered, my voice cracking. He finally looked back at me, and the look in his eyes wasn't his usual dopey, happy expression. It was wide, uncertain. He trotted back to me and pressed himself against my leg, a low whine finally escaping his throat. He was scared. My dog, who once tried to pick a fight with a pickup truck, was scared. I don't know how long we stood there. Probably only 10 or 20 seconds, but it felt like an hour. Every shadow between the trees looked like it was moving. Every normal forest sound, a squirrel chattering, a bird calling, made me jump. The adrenaline was like a fire in my veins, screaming at me to run, but my legs felt like they were made of wet clay. I had to know. I had to see if there was any proof. Maybe it was a bear with some kind of mange. Maybe it was a person. Maybe I was just seeing things. I had to convince myself I wasn't going crazy. "Come on," I said to Rex, my voice still a shaky whisper. I leaned my bike against a tree. I wasn't thinking about leaving it. I was just thinking about getting a closer look. I took a few steps off the trail, my hiking boots sinking into the soft layer of decaying leaves. Rex stayed right on my heels, his body tense. It was harder to move through the undergrowth than it had looked for that thing. I was pushing ferns aside, stepping over fallen branches. The air felt colder away from the trail, and the smell of damp earth and pine was overwhelming. I was trying to walk quietly, but every step I took sounded like a gunshot to my ears. Crunch, crunch, swish. I got to the general area where I'd seen it. There was a small, slightly cleared spot near the base of a big oak tree. This is where it had been squatting. I looked down, my eyes scanning the ground, looking for a footprint, anything. There was nothing. The ground was a mess of leaves and pine needles. It was soft. If something that big had been standing here, it should have left a mark. I got down on my hands and knees, pushing the leaves aside with my hands. I was searching for a depression, a broken twig, a single hair caught on the bark of the tree. My fingers were trembling. Nothing. The forest floor was undisturbed. It was as if I had imagined the whole thing, but I hadn't. The image was burned into my brain. The dirty white-grey color, the immense rounded shoulders, the way it stood up so impossibly fast and smooth, the utter silence of its departure. That wasn't a hallucination. That was real. A fresh wave of terror washed over me, colder than the first. If there were no tracks, then what was it? How could something that solid, that heavy, just disappear without a trace? The logical part of my brain, the part that was still clinging to sanity, just shut down. This wasn't logical. I stood up, my knees popping. I was breathing too fast, on the verge of hyperventilating. Rex was whining constantly now, pulling gently on the edge of my jacket with his teeth, trying to tug me back towards the trail. He wanted out of there, so did I. I stumbled back to my bike, my head on a swivel, scanning the trees in every direction. The woods didn't feel peaceful or beautiful anymore. They felt like a cage. The trees felt like bars, and I had the overwhelming, skin-crawling sensation that I was being watched, that the thing was still there, just out of sight, observing us. I grabbed my bike, my hands so slick with sweat I could barely grip the handlebars. I didn't even bother trying to get on and ride properly. I just started half running, half walking, pushing the bike alongside me, the front wheel wobbling. Rex was right with me, his leash trailing, not running ahead like he usually would. Every few feet I'd look back over my shoulder. I expected to see it standing at the edge of the trail, watching us go. Or worse, following us, moving silently from tree to tree. But I saw nothing. Just the empty, quiet woods. That was almost worse, the not knowing. The trip back to the parking lot was a blur of pure, unadulterated fear. The sunlit patches of trail didn't feel warm anymore. They felt exposed. The shaded parts felt like ambush points. My heart never slowed down. It was a constant, frantic drumbeat in my chest. I was listening so hard for any sound out of the ordinary, that the ordinary sounds, the wind in the leaves, my own ragged breathing, were almost painful. When I finally broke out of the tree line and saw the parking lot, my car sitting there alone, it was like seeing salvation. I've never been so happy to see my beat-up old Subaru in my life. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice on the gravel. Rex jumped into the back seat without me having to tell him, which he never does. I threw my bike into the back, not even bothering to strap it to the rack properly. I just shoved it in, wheels and all, and slammed the hatchback closed. I scrambled into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and started the engine. The sound of it turning over was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I sat there for a minute, just gripping the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath. I looked at myself in the rear-view mirror. My face was pale, my eyes were wide, and there was a sheen of sweat on my forehead. I looked like I'd just seen a ghost, or something else. I drove home too fast, my knuckles white on the wheel. I kept checking my rear-view mirror, half expecting to see a dirty white shape loping after the car down the road. Of course I didn't. I got home, unloaded my bike, brought Rex inside. He went straight to his water bowl and drank for a full minute, then collapsed on his bed and fell asleep almost instantly, like the whole experience had drained him. I couldn't sit still. I paced around my apartment, going over every second of it in my head. The color, dirty white, not brown, not black. The height, at least 6 feet. The build, ape-like, not human. The way it moved, that fast, fluid rise from a squat. The silence, the complete and total lack of any sound when it moved. The lack of tracks. Rex's reaction, or lack thereof. I tried to rationalize it. A bear with a severe case of mange can look pretty monstrous and turn a weird color, but bears don't stand up like that and just vanish. They make noise, they leave tracks, and they don't have those kind of proportions. This was built differently, and Rhode Island doesn't have albino bears, as far as I know. A person in a suit out in the middle of the Black Hut management area on a random Saturday. Why? And how did they move so fast and so quietly? How did they leave no tracks? None of it fit. Nothing made sense. That was weeks ago. I haven't been back on my bike since. I look at the trails on my map now and I just feel this cold dread. I can't even take Rex for a walk in the local park without getting jumpy if I see something move in the periphery. The worst part, the part that keeps me up at night, isn't even the sight of it. It's the feeling I had afterwards. That feeling of being watched. The certainty that it was still there, hidden, and that it had let me go. I keep thinking about its back being turned to me. Was it ignoring me, or was it aware of me the entire time? And that was just a posture, a display. I don't know. I'll never know. I saw something in the woods that day that I can't explain, something that shouldn't exist, and it looked right at me without ever turning its head, and then it was just gone, leaving me with nothing but a memory and a fear that sunk so deep into my bones, I don't think it's ever coming out. Story 3. We had our 2 black and tan hounds with us, Duke and Daisy, good dogs, solid. They knew the game. We'd been out for a couple hours, but the coons were laying low. It was one of those nights where you just know you're not going to get anything. The woods were too quiet, not even the usual rustle of possums or the hoot of an owl. It was just dead. We decided to call it and head back to the truck. We were maybe a half-mile into the property, following a faint trail that cut between a thicket of woods and this huge, unharvested cornfield. The corn was way over my head, dry and rustling in the little bit of wind there was. It sounded like 1,000 people whispering. I was bringing up the rear, just trudging along, tired and a little pissed we'd wasted a perfect full moon. My brother was up ahead with one of the other guys, and our third friend was just a few yards in front of me. The dogs were on their leads, trotting along, not really pulling or anything. Then, without any warning, they just went nuts. It wasn't the usual "I smell a squirrel" bark. It was this high-pitched, frantic yelping. The hair on the back of my neck didn't just stand up. It felt like every single one was trying to crawl right off my skin. Duke and Daisy ripped their leashes right out of my friend's hands and bolted ahead into the dark, their barks turning into these terrified, almost screaming yelps. The sound was just awful. It was pure fear. I'd never heard a dog make a noise like that. My friends up ahead shouted something, but I couldn't make it out. They took off running after the dogs, their flashlight beams bouncing wildly through the trees and then disappearing into the corn. I was left alone. Just like that. 1 second there were 4 of us. The next it was just me, standing at the edge of this ocean of corn, listening to the sound of my friends crashing through the stalks and the dogs' panicked noises getting farther and farther away. I remember feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was that deep, gut-level kind of cold. I fumbled with my flashlight. My hands were suddenly shaking so bad I could barely grip it. I swung the beam out into the corn. Nothing. Just row after row of tall, dry stalks, the leaves looking pale and sickly in the artificial light. The rustling sound seemed to get louder, but I told myself it was just the wind, even though the air was almost perfectly still. That's when I heard it. It started low, like a rumble you feel in your chest more than hear with your ears. Then it built into this scream, I can't even do it justice with words. It was loud, so loud it felt like it was inside my skull. It was deep, guttural, and full of this rage, this pure, undiluted hatred. It wasn't an animal sound. I've heard bobcats scream. I've heard foxes. I've heard a rabbit when a hawk grabs it. This was different. This was something that knew what fear was and enjoyed causing it. The sound echoed across the field, and I could hear it moving, fast. It was coming from my left, from deep in the corn, and it was coming straight for me. The sound of the cornstalks breaking was what really sealed the terror. It wasn't a deer or a person moving through. A deer is light, quick. This was a constant crashing sound. Snap, crunch, snap, crunch. It sounded like a tank was plowing through the field, like something massive and unstoppable was just bulldozing its way through, not caring what it destroyed. The scream kept coming, that horrible, rage-filled noise, and it was getting closer with every heartbeat. I froze for a second, my brain just short-circuiting. My legs felt like they were made of wood. Then every survival instinct I had kicked in at once. I turned and I ran. I didn't think about my friends. I didn't think about the dogs. I didn't think about anything except the need to get away from that sound. I crashed into the corn, the dry leaves whipping at my face and hands, scratching my skin. I was just wearing a flannel shirt and a jacket, and I could feel the sharp edges cutting through the fabric. I dropped my flashlight. I heard it hit the ground, and the light went out, plunging me into near-total darkness. The only light was the moon, casting those long, deceptive shadows. I ran blindly, my arms up to protect my face, stumbling over the rough ground. I could hear it behind me, the crashing and the screaming, and it was so much closer. It was gaining on me. I could feel the vibrations in the ground. Each crash was like a punch to my back. My lungs were burning. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. I've never been so scared in my entire life. This wasn't the fun scary of a horror movie. This was a primal, bowel-loosening terror. I knew with a certainty I've never felt about anything else, that if this thing caught me, I was dead. It wasn't just going to scare me, it was going to tear me apart. I tripped over a hidden rock or a cornstalk root and went down hard, landing on my hands and knees. The impact knocked the wind out of me. The crashing sound was right on top of me. I knew I couldn't outrun it. There was no point. In that moment, a weird sort of calm washed over me. If I was gonna die, I wasn't gonna die running with my back to it. I was gonna see what it was. I scrambled to my feet and turned around, my whole body trembling so violently I could barely stand. The corn in front of me was shaking, the stalks whipping back and forth. The sound was deafening. I braced myself, my fists clenched, though I knew it was pointless. I was just a guy. This was something else, and then it burst through the wall of corn. It happened so fast, but every detail is burned into my brain. It was huge, I mean, impossibly huge. It had to be 8, 9 feet tall at least. It was bent forward, running in a low, powerful crouch, and it had a full-grown deer slung over its shoulder like it was nothing more than a sack of potatoes. The deer's head was lolling, its legs dangling. The thing was covered in dark hair, but it wasn't like a bear. It was stringier. Thick, ropey muscles moved under that hair. I didn't see its face clearly. It was just a dark shape, a massive silhouette against the moonlit corn. It was moving with such speed and force that it didn't even see me. It ran straight into me. The impact was like getting hit by a car. 1 second I was standing there, the next I was flat on my back, the world spinning, all the air gone from my lungs. I saw stars. I felt a sharp, cracking pain in my shoulder, and my head snapped back against the hard ground. For a second, I was just stunned, lying there in the dirt, unable to breathe, unable to think. Then I heard a heavy, wet thud next to me. I managed to turn my head, gasping for air that wouldn't come. The thing had dropped the deer. It had stopped maybe 10, 15 feet past me. It turned its head, and for a single horrifying second, I saw its eyes. They caught the moonlight, and they glowed with a faint reddish shine. It wasn't a reflection like a deer's eyes. It was like a low fire was burning behind them. It let out this huff, a short, sharp, surprised sound. It seemed a shock to see me as I was to see it. Then, in one fluid, powerful motion, it turned and vanished back into the corn. The crashing sound started again, moving away from me, this time fast, until they faded into nothing. Silence. The whole thing, from the scream to it disappearing, couldn't have been more than a minute, maybe two. It felt like a lifetime. I just lay there for, I don't know how long, maybe a full minute, just trying to breathe. My chest felt like it was caved in. My shoulder was screaming in pain. I could feel a warm trickle of blood on my forehead from where I'd hit the ground. I slowly, painfully pushed myself up onto my elbows. My whole body was one giant ache. That's when I looked at the deer. It was lying on its side, maybe 5 feet from me. It was a big buck, 8-point, or it had been. Its back legs were twitching. It was still alive. The smell hit me then. A thick, coppery smell of blood and something else. Something musky and wild, like wet dog and old leaves. That was the thing's smell. It lingered in the air. I crawled over to the deer, my movements slow and jerky. I pulled out my small backup flashlight from my pocket, my hands shaking so bad I could barely click it on. The beam was weak, but it was enough. The sight of that deer is something I'll never forget. Its back was broken. I could see the unnatural angle of its spine, a lump where there shouldn't be one. One of its back legs was twisted completely around, the hoof pointing the wrong way, its antlers. One was snapped clean off, lying in the dirt beside its head. The other was splintered, hanging by a strip of skin. This wasn't damage from a car. A car hit breaks legs, causes internal bleeding. This was blunt force trauma. This was something that had grabbed this powerful animal and just broken it, like you or I would break a twig. The hide was torn in places, not cut, but ripped, as if by immense hands. I heard my friends then, shouting my name, their flashlight beams cutting through the corn. They found me kneeling there next to this broken, dying deer, covered in dirt and blood, my face white as a sheet. I must have looked insane. They helped me up. I was babbling, trying to tell them what happened. There was something, a thing, and it had the deer. It ran into me. My words weren't making any sense. My brother, he just looked at me like I'd lost my mind. They all did. They thought I'd fallen, hit my head, and was hallucinating. They figured the deer had been hit by a car and staggered into the field to die, and I just tripped over it in the dark. We ended up dressing the deer right there. We had to. It was the humane thing to do. As we field dressed it, the damage became even more apparent. The ribs on one side were caved in. The pelvis was shattered. My brother, who's butchered more deer than anyone I know, stopped at one point and just stared at the carcass. He looked at me, and for a second the skepticism in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, unsettling confusion. Jesus, he muttered. Something big did this. Real big. But that was it. That was the only admission I ever got. By the time we got back to the truck, the story had already been decided. I'd had a concussion. I'd imagined the whole thing. We called the game warden the next day, told him we'd found a deer with strange injuries. He came out, looked at it for maybe 2 minutes, and said it had gotten tangled in a fence and broken its back, struggling to get free. A fence. A fence doesn't snap an antler off. A fence doesn't cave in a rib cage. Nobody believed me. Not my brother, not my friends. For years, I was the guy who saw Bigfoot. It became a joke, a story to tell around the campfire to get a laugh at my expense. Remember that time you got knocked on your ass by a ghost? Ha. But I remember the weight of it hitting me, the feeling of my bones rattling. I remember the smell, that musky, wild stench. I remember the sound of the cornstalks breaking like gunshots. And I remember that scream, that god-awful, rage-filled scream that didn't belong to anything on this earth. It's been years now, but sometimes, on a quiet, cold night when the moon is full, I'll wake up in a cold sweat, That scream echoing in my ears, the phantom smell of blood and wet fur filling my nose. I know what I saw, I know what hit me, and the worst part isn't that no one believes me. The worst part is knowing that something that powerful, that terrifying, is still out there, moving through the dark, and I was just lucky it was as surprised as I was. Story 4. I was dead asleep when my wife shook me awake. Not gently, like she usually does if I'm snoring, but hard, her hand gripping my shoulder so tight it almost hurt. My first thought was that she'd had a nightmare or something, but then I saw her face in the dim light from the window. She was pale, her eyes wide, and she was holding her breath. "Listen," she whispered, her voice shaky. I sat up, still groggy, and that's when I heard it. From somewhere out in the woods, maybe half a mile away, came this sound. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. Not a howl, not a scream. It was both, but more. It started low, like a deep groan, then rose up into this high-pitched shriek that seemed to vibrate through the cabin walls. The tone kept changing, rising and falling in waves, and it echoed through the trees, so it felt like it was coming from everywhere at once. It lasted about 30 seconds, but it felt way longer, like time had slowed down. The raw power of it was terrifying. It wasn't just loud, it was primal, like something ancient and huge was out there, and it was pissed off or in pain. I've spent a lot of time in the woods, and I know what mountain lions sound like. Their screams are eerie, but they're sharp and short. This was different. It had this echoing quality that made the silence around it feel even heavier. Owls hoot, coyotes yip, but this was on another level. My heart was hammering in my chest so hard I could feel it in my throat. I looked at my wife, and she was frozen, just staring at the window like she expected something to burst through it. We didn't say anything for a minute after it stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse, because now every little noise, the creak of the cabin, the wind outside, made me jump. I got out of bed slowly, my legs feeling weak, and went to the window. The woods were pitch black beyond the moonlit clearing around the cabin. I couldn't see anything, but I had this overwhelming sense that something was out there, watching us. My skin was crawling, and I had goosebumps all over my arms. I remember my hands were trembling when I reached for the curtain to pull it aside a little more. The air in the room felt thick, like we were trapped in a bubble, and the smell of pine and damp earth from outside seeped in, mixed with this metallic tang of fear I could almost taste. My wife came up beside me, her hand on my back. She was breathing fast, and I could feel her shaking. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't have an answer. We just stood there for what felt like ages, listening. But everything was dead quiet now, too quiet. Normally you'd hear crickets or the rustle of small animals, but it was like the woods had gone still, like everything was hiding. That's when the real fear set in, not just from the sound, but from the absence of everything else. It was as if whatever made that noise had scared off every living thing for miles. We decided to check the doors and windows, make sure they were locked. The cabin is old, and the locks are basic. Just simple bolts on the doors. I remember my fingers fumbling with the one on the front door. It was stiff and cold to the touch. My wife followed me, her footsteps soft on the wooden floor. We didn't talk much, just exchanged looks that said everything. We were scared, and we had no idea what to do. Part of me wanted to grab a flashlight and go outside, but another part, the smarter part, knew that was a terrible idea. Whatever made that sound was big, and I didn't want to meet it in the dark. We ended up sitting on the couch in the living room, huddled together under a blanket. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second dragging. I kept straining my ears, expecting to hear it again, but nothing came. My mind was racing, trying to place the sound. I thought maybe it was a bear or something, but bears don't make noises like that. I'd heard recordings of elk bugling, but this was more intense, more human-like in its anguish. That's what got me. There was a sadness to it, or maybe a rage, that felt almost intelligent. After a while, maybe an hour, we tried to go back to bed, but neither of us could sleep. I lay there with my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, while my wife curled up next to me, her body tense. Every time the wind picked up or a branch tapped against the roof, I'd flinch. My heart wouldn't slow down. It was like I'd run a marathon. I could feel the sweat on my forehead, cold and clammy. The memory of that sound kept replaying in my head. The way it started low, built up to that piercing shriek, then faded out like it was being dragged away. It was so loud, so clear, that I could almost feel it in my bones, like a vibration. As the sky started to lighten with dawn, around 5 in the morning, we finally got up. The first thing we did was step outside onto the porch. The air was crisp and fresh, and the woods looked normal again. Birds were chirping, squirrels were chattering. It was like nothing had happened, but the feeling lingered. We walked around the cabin looking for any signs, tracks, broken branches, anything. The ground was soft from recent rains, so I thought maybe we'd find footprints, but there was nothing obvious. No large tracks, no disturbed soil, just the usual deer and raccoon prints. That almost made it worse, because it meant whatever it was hadn't come close, or it was careful. We spent the rest of the morning packing up to leave early. We'd planned to stay another day, but neither of us wanted to be there after that. The drive home was quiet. We didn't talk much, just stared out the windows, lost in our thoughts. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following us, but it was just the empty road winding through the trees. A few weeks later, I was telling a friend about it over beers. He's into outdoors stuff too. And when I described the sound, his eyes got wide. He said, "Dude, that sounds like Bigfoot vocalizations." I laughed at first because, come on, Bigfoot. But he pulled out his laptop and showed me some clips from online forums. People who'd recorded similar sounds in remote areas. And damn if it wasn't almost identical. That rising and falling tone, the raw echo, the way it seemed to carry for miles. Listening to those recordings sent chills down my spine all over again. It was like hearing that night replay, and suddenly everything felt real in a way I hadn't let myself believe. Now, whenever I'm in the woods, I can't help but listen differently. Every crack of a branch or distant call makes me tense up, wondering if it's still out there. That one night changed how I see the wild. It's not just peaceful anymore. It's hiding something I can't explain. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can almost hear it again, echoing in the back of my mind. A reminder that we're never really alone out there. Story 5. Okay, I'll try to write this out the way it happened. I've never told this to anyone outside my family and my buddy for obvious reasons. But it's been years, and it still messes with my head when I think about it. Writing it down might, I don't know. Maybe it'll help, or maybe it'll just bring it all back. But here goes. It was late August, 1997. I remember the date because it was just after my kid's 3rd birthday, and we were still kind of buzzing from that. I was a sergeant, an NCO, stationed up in Alaska, north of Fairbanks, on this military installation. It's a huge place, lots of wilderness, but you feel safe because it's a base, right? Monitored, controlled, or so you think. That day had been normal. Long, but normal. I'd been on duty. My wife had picked me up with our little boy in the back seat. My hunting buddy, he'd been with us too. He's like a brother. We've been through everything together since we were kids. We were all tired, just ready to get home, have some dinner, and crash. It was just past dusk. Not full dark, but that deep, gloomy Alaskan twilight where the sky is still kind of lit, but everything on the ground is sinking into shadows. The kind of light that plays tricks on you, but we all saw what we saw. No tricks. We were on this standard road, one of the main ones cutting through the base. It's about 35 feet wide, paved, with thick forest pressing in on both sides. I was driving, my wife in the passenger seat, my buddy in the back behind me, and my son asleep in his car seat behind my wife. The radio was off. It was quiet, just the hum of the engine and the sound of the tires on the road. I had the headlights on, cutting a path through the growing dark. We were talking softly, not about anything important, just winding down. I remember feeling the day's tension starting to leave my shoulders. Then it happened. Something moved at the edge of the tree line to our right. My eyes snapped to it. At first I thought it was a moose. You see a lot of them up there, big dark shapes, but this was different. It stepped out onto the road and my brain just stuttered. It was tall, so damn tall. I'd say about 7 feet, but it felt bigger because of how it moved. It was covered in dark hair like a bear, but it wasn't a bear. It walked on 2 legs, upright, smooth, not like a person shuffling or a bear hobbling awkwardly. This was fluid, powerful. It crossed the road directly in front of us, maybe 50 feet ahead. I hadn't even had time to hit the brakes. I just took my foot off the gas, my hands tightening on the wheel. It took 4, maybe 5 steps. That's it. 4 or 5 long strides, and it covered the entire 35-foot width of the road. I've never seen anything move like that. It was effortless, like it was just gliding. My wife gasped, a sharp, choked-off sound. I heard my buddy in the back suck in a breath. "What the hell is that?" he whispered, but it wasn't really a question. It was pure disbelief. The thing moved into the headlights for a second, and that's when the details hit me. The hair wasn't shaggy like a grizzly's. It was more like a thick, matted fur, dark brown or black, hard to tell in the light. Its arms were long, swinging slightly as it walked. The legs were powerful. It didn't look at us, it just kept going, its head facing forward like we weren't even there, like it had some place to be and we were just a minor obstacle. Then it was gone. It stepped off the pavement and vanished into the thick brush and trees on the left side of the road, the side that slopes down towards the China River. The car rolled to a stop. I hadn't even consciously decided to stop. My body just did it. The engine was still running. For a few seconds, nobody said anything. The only sound was my own heart hammering in my ears, so loud I was sure everyone could hear it. Then my wife spoke, her voice trembling. "What was that?" She turned in her seat to look at our son, who was still sleeping, thank God. "Was that a bear?" "No," my buddy said from the back. His voice was flat, firm. "That wasn't a bear." He was right. We're both hunters. We've tracked bear, moose, caribou. We know how they move. Bears don't walk like that. They don't have that smooth, confident bipedal gait. They don't cover that much ground in so few steps. A bear would have been lower to the ground, more of a lumber. This thing was, efficient. It was built for that movement. I just sat there, my hands still glued to the steering wheel. I could feel a cold sweat breaking out on my back under my uniform shirt. My mouth was dry. I tried to swallow and couldn't. This was a military base, a secured area. What the hell was that thing doing here? How did it get here? The questions were just spinning in my head. Useless. "We should go," my wife said, her voice getting higher, edged with panic. "Just go, please." I looked in the rearview mirror at my buddy. His face was pale, his eyes wide. He just gave a slight nod. He felt it too, the wrongness of it. But I couldn't just drive away. I'm a soldier. My job is to assess threats, to identify. This was an unidentified something on my base, near my family. "I'm pulling over," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Why?" my wife asked, her hand gripping my arm. "I just need a second, we all do." I put the car in park on the shoulder of the road, right about where the thing had disappeared. We were all just staring into the wall of trees and darkness where it had gone. The forest was silent. No birds, no rustling, just this heavy, waiting silence. We sat there for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably only 2 or 3. Nobody spoke. My mind was racing, trying to fit what I'd seen into a box I understood. Bigfoot? Sasquatch? Those were campfire stories, things you laughed about. You didn't see them on a US Army installation in Alaska. You didn't see them, period. My buddy finally broke the silence. We should go look. My wife immediately said, no, absolutely not. Are you crazy? Our son is in the car. We'll stay close to the car, I said, the decision solidifying as I spoke. Just right at the tree line. I have to see. I have to know. I had a flashlight in the glove box, a big heavy mag light. I pulled it out. My buddy didn't have a weapon, but he got out with me. I looked at my wife. Lock the doors. We'll be right here. You can see us the whole time. She nodded, her face tight with fear. But she didn't argue. She knew me. She knew I couldn't just let this go. The air outside was cool, the Alaskan night air that always has a bite to it. It felt good on my skin, which was still hot with adrenaline. I clicked on the flashlight. The beam cut into the darkness, but the trees just swallowed it up after 20 feet or so. We walked to the edge of the road where the thing had stepped off. The ground was a mix of dirt, gravel, and tough, short grass. We stood there for a moment just listening, nothing. The silence was deeper out here, more oppressive. I swept the flashlight beam over the ground. At first, I didn't see anything, just grass and dirt. Then my buddy pointed. There, just at the edge of the beam, where the pavement ended and the soil began, there was a depression, a footprint. My heart started thumping again. We moved closer, slowly. I kept the light on it. It was a print, a big one, longer and wider than a man's boot, but not shaped like a bear's paw. It was more human-like, but wrong. The toes were broad, but the thing that got me, the thing that sent a fresh chill right through my guts, was the orientation. The print was pigeon-toed. The whole foot was angled inward. I've spent my whole life hunting, tracking. I've seen deer tracks, moose, wolf, bear, you name it. I've never ever seen a track that angled inward like that. It wasn't a deformity. It was how it was made. The thing walked with its feet pointing in. Holy shit, my buddy breathed. We followed the trail. It wasn't easy. The thing had moved into an area of mixed brush and stunted black spruce. The ground was uneven, covered in a carpet of brown needles and moss, but every few feet we'd find another one of those prints. Always the same, deep, clear in the soft patches, showing the inward angle. The stride was immense. I'd take 3 or 4 steps for every one of its strides. We were maybe 15, 20 yards into the trees now. The car was still visible behind us, a dark shape with the interior light on. My wife a pale face in the window. I could feel the weight of the forest around us. It felt like we were being watched. I kept swinging the flashlight around, the beam jerking through the trees, expecting to see those eyes reflecting back at me. But there was nothing. Just more trees, more shadows. The tracks led down a gentle slope towards the sound of the China River, which we could now hear faintly, a soft rushing in the distance. The air was damp and cold down here. We found a spot where it must have paused. The prints were deeper, closer together, and the moss was scuffed up. I imagined it standing there, maybe looking back at the road, at our car. The thought made the hair on my arms stand up. We kept going, a little further. The trail was getting fainter as the ground got harder. We lost it near a fallen log. We searched for a few minutes, sweeping the light back and forth, but that was it. The tracks just stopped, or we lost them. It was like it had just melted into the woods. We stood there for a minute, listening to the river and our own breathing. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a deep crawling unease. This was real, we hadn't imagined it. The evidence was right there in the dirt. "We should go back," my buddy said quietly. He didn't have to say why. The feeling of being watched had only gotten stronger. The woods felt hostile now. This wasn't our place anymore. We turned and made our way back to the car, moving faster than we had on the way in. I kept glancing over my shoulder, the flashlight beam dancing wildly. Every snap of a twig under our own feet made me jump. When we got back to the road, My wife unlocked the doors and we got in quickly. The inside of the car felt safe, but it was a fragile safety. The world outside the windows was different now. I started the car and pulled back onto the road. We drove the rest of the way home in near silence. My wife was crying softly, just wiping at her eyes. My buddy was staring out the window, his jaw tight. I was just trying to process it all. We got home, got our son to bed without waking him. The three of us sat at the kitchen table. We talked in low voices, going over it again and again. What did we see? What was it? We had no answers. Just that image burned into our brains. The tall, dark shape moving with impossible smoothness across the road, and those bizarre, pigeon-toed tracks leading off into the dark. We made a decision that night. We wouldn't report it, not officially. Who would we tell, our chain of command? They'd think we were crazy. We'd be the guys who saw Bigfoot on base, our careers, our reputations. It wasn't worth the ridicule. We agreed to keep it between us, and we did, for years, but I never forgot. I still dream about it sometimes, not the whole thing, just that moment of it stepping into the headlights. That silent, powerful stride, and those tracks. I'll always remember those tracks, angled inward, in a way that nothing else walks. It changed how I see the woods. I still hunt, but I'm always looking over my shoulder now. I always feel like something is just out of sight, moving through the trees in a way I can't comprehend. Something that doesn't belong in any field guide. Something that walked right through the middle of our controlled, secure world like it wasn't even there, and left us with a mystery that I know, in my gut, I will never ever solve. Story 6. The night started out normal, cool, clear. The kind of quiet you only get way out in the woods, miles from anything. We had a fire, roasted marshmallows, told stories. My grandson fell asleep in his parents' tent, and the rest of us turned in not long after. I was in my own small tent, the old reliable one I've had for 20 years. I remember the feeling of the cold air on my face, the smell of pine and damp earth, and the absolute blackness when I zipped the fly shut. I fell asleep pretty quick. I don't know what time it was when the first noise woke me up. It was deep in the night, the kind of hour where everything feels dead. The sound was a sharp crack, not like a twig snapping, but louder, deeper, like a thick branch breaking. I lay there for a second, listening, my heart starting to thump a little harder against my ribs. I told myself it was nothing, a falling branch, an animal. Then it came again, and this time it was different. It was a thud, a solid, heavy impact, like someone had dropped a big rock onto another big rock. It echoed a little in the basin we were camped in. I heard my son's voice then, a low murmur from the other tent. "You hear that?" he whispered, loud enough for me to catch. "Yeah," I whispered back. "Probably just a bear. Go back to sleep." But I didn't believe it. I was already sitting up, my sleeping bag pulled around my waist. The air in the tent felt suddenly colder. I held my breath, straining to hear. That's when the knocking started. It was a rhythmic sound, but not a natural one, not like a woodpecker. This was slower, heavier. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like someone was taking a sledgehammer to the base of a giant tree. Each impact was so solid, so powerful, I could feel the vibration in the ground through my sleeping pad. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either, a few hundred yards maybe, right in the direction we'd hung that deer. My mind was racing, trying to place the sound, a beaver slapping its tail. No, this was wood on wood, a deep, resonant concussion, a bear breaking a tree for grubs, maybe, but it was so methodical. Thump, thump. Then a pause, then 3 more quick ones. Thump, thump, thump. It felt intentional, like a signal. Then the growl started. It began as a low rumble, so deep it was almost more of a feeling than a sound, a bass note that vibrated in my chest cavity. It built from that, getting louder, rising in pitch, until it wasn't a growl anymore. It was a scream, a high, piercing, unearthly shriek that tore through the silence and just didn't stop. It wasn't an animal in pain. It wasn't a coyote or a fox or a mountain lion. I've heard all of those. This was something else. It was a sound of pure, raw fury. It was intelligent. It felt like it was being directed at us. It went on and on for what felt like an eternity. My watch said it lasted 15 minutes, but in that tent, in the dark, it felt like an hour. My hands were shaking. I could hear my grandson crying in the other tent, a scared, muffled sob, and my daughter-in-law trying to shush him, her own voice tight with fear. That's when I knew I had to do something. The dad instinct, the grandpa instinct kicked in. I couldn't just lie there while my family was terrified. I fumbled for my big Maglite flashlight, my fingers clumsy and cold. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. "I'm going to take a look," I said, my voice sounding thin and reedy. "Don't," my son said, his voice sharp. "Just stay put." But I was already unzipping the tent. The cold night air hit me like a physical blow. It was absolutely freezing. I stood up, my legs feeling weak, and clicked on the flashlight. The beam cut a shaky path through the darkness, illuminating the trunks of the pines, the fallen needles on the ground. Everything was still. The screaming had stopped as suddenly as it began. The knocking had stopped. The only sound was the frantic beating of my own heart in my ears. I swept the light back and forth, starting from the left, moving slowly to the right. The beam was strong, but the forest is a big place, and the darkness just swallows the light after a certain point. I panned past the other tent, saw my son's pale face peering out through the mesh window. I gave him what I hoped was a reassuring nod and kept scanning. I moved the light to the right, toward the direction of all the noise. I saw nothing, just trees, shadows, more trees. I started to swing the beam back toward camp, and that's when I saw it. About 50, 60 yards out, just at the edge of the tree line, there was a single point of light, an eye shine. But it was wrong, all wrong. It was high up, way too high. I'm 6 feet tall, and this was a good 2 feet above my eye level, maybe more. 8 feet off the ground, easy. The light from my flashlight reflected back as a solid reddish-orange disc. It wasn't the twin points of a deer or the close-set green of a coyote. It was one single, unblinking eye, staring right back at me from a height that made no sense. My breath caught in my throat. I froze, the flashlight beam locked on that single, burning eye. It didn't move. It just held there, watching me. The feeling that washed over me was a cold, bottomless dread. This wasn't a bear on its hind legs. This was something else, something standing. My brain was screaming at me to move, to do something. With a jerk, I swung the flashlight beam back to where the eye was, trying to illuminate the body to see what it was attached to. There was nothing there. The spot was empty, just dark trees and deeper shadows. The eye was gone, vanished, as if it had never been there, but it had. I saw it. I know what I saw. I stood there for another full minute, maybe 2, sweeping the light back and forth across that same patch of forest. Nothing, not a sound, not a rustle. The entire woods had gone dead silent. No crickets, no wind in the pines, nothing. It was an unnatural, heavy silence, like the whole forest was holding its breath. The air itself felt thick, oppressive. The cold seemed to seep right through my jacket and into my bones. "What is it?" my son hissed from his tent. I couldn't tell him what I'd seen. I couldn't form the words. My mouth was dry. "Nothing," I managed to croak out. "Probably just a bear. It's gone now. Go back to sleep." I didn't believe a word of it. I backed into my tent, my movements stiff, and zipped the fly shut. I sat there in the dark, the maglite still clutched in my hand, listening to that profound, terrifying silence. I didn't sleep another wink. I just sat there, waiting for the sun, every nerve in my body stretched tight. Every tiny sound, the rustle of my sleeping bag, my own breathing, sounded like a thunderclap in that quiet. I was convinced that whatever was out there was still there, just beyond the thin nylon wall of my tent, waiting, watching. The first grey light of dawn, was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. As soon as it was light enough to see, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. My son was already up, his face drawn and tired. We didn't speak, we just looked at each other, and I knew he hadn't slept either. We both knew it wasn't a bear. "Let's go check the deer," I said, my voice rough. We walked together, the crunch of our boots on the forest floor, loud in the morning stillness. The woods were back to normal, birds were chirping, a squirrel chattered somewhere, but the normalcy felt fake, like a thin veneer over what had happened last night. We got to the spot where we'd hung the deer. The rope was still there, tied securely between the two pines. The deer carcass was still there, untouched. It swung gently in the morning breeze, completely intact. No bites taken out of it, no claw marks, nothing. A bear, a mountain lion, anything would have torn into it, dragged it down. This was just left, as if it had been ignored. My son pointed, his hand trembling slightly. "Dad, look." I followed his gaze to the base of a massive ponderosa pine, maybe 3 feet in diameter. It was down, not broken off halfway up, but pushed over. The trunk was snapped at the base, the raw, splintered wood pointing up at the sky. The root ball was partially out of the ground, a huge mound of dirt and tangled roots. There were no claw marks on the trunk, no sign of beaver teeth. It looked like it had been shoved over by a giant hand, by sheer brute force. We just stood there, staring at the downed tree and the untouched deer. The air was cold, but I felt a different kind of cold inside, a deep, chilling realization. The noises, the scream, the eye shine so high off the ground, the silence, and now this. It all clicked together into a picture I didn't want to see. Whatever had been in the woods with us last night wasn't just some animal. It was something that could push over a full-grown pine tree like it was a sapling. Something that could scream with a voice that didn't belong in this world. Something that watched us with a single intelligent eye from a height that defied explanation. We packed up camp in record time. No one spoke much. We just worked, quickly, efficiently, throwing everything into the truck. My grandson was quiet, clinging to his mother. We didn't even make coffee. We just got in and drove away, leaving Virginia Lakes behind us in the rearview mirror. I've been a hunter and an outdoorsman my whole life. I thought I knew the woods. I thought I knew the sounds, the signs. I was wrong. That day, September 30th, 2015, something showed me that there are things out there that don't follow the rules. Things that don't fit in any book or field guide. And the most terrifying part isn't the scream or the eye or the broken tree. It's the silence that followed, the knowing that it was out there and that it knew we were there too, and the fact that I still don't know what it was. I don't think I ever will. I just know that we were not alone and that we were not the ones in control that night. I haven't been back camping since. Story 7. So, I've been sitting on this for a while, but I need to get it out. I've seen other people talk about weird stuff happening in the woods, and I always thought they were exaggerating or just messing around. But after what happened to me and my friend last summer, I don't doubt any of it anymore. This is going to be long, but I have to tell it all, because every detail matters, and I still get chills thinking about it. It was a Friday in late July, and my friend and I decided to go fly fishing along the Owens River, right between Mammoth and June Lake. We'd been planning this trip for weeks, just a guy's thing, you know, to get away from work and the city noise. We left early in the morning, around 6, and drove up from Bishop. The air was cool and crisp, and the sky was that perfect blue you only see in the mountains. I remember feeling really relaxed, just looking forward to a day of casting lines and maybe catching some trout. We got to our spot by around 8 in the morning. It's this secluded area off a dirt road, not too far from the main highway, but once you're down by the river, it feels like you're miles from anyone. The Owens River is beautiful there. Clear, fast-moving water with lots of bends and overhanging trees. We parked my truck in a small pull-off area, maybe 50 feet from the riverbank. It's an old Ford F-150, beat up but reliable, and we unloaded our gear. waders, rods, a cooler with sandwiches and beers for later. The fishing started off great. We were both waist-deep in the river, the water cold enough to make your legs numb after a while, but in a good way. The sun was climbing, and it warmed up fast. I remember the sound of the river, that constant rush and gurgle, and the occasional splash when one of us hooked a fish. We weren't talking much, just enjoying the silence and the rhythm of casting. My friend is a quiet guy, same as me, so we'd just nod or give a thumbs up when one of us got a bite. Around noon, we took a break and sat on the bank to eat. We'd caught a few small trout, nothing huge, but it was satisfying. The air was still and it felt peaceful. I remember noticing how quiet it was. No birds, no wind, just the river. It was a little eerie, but I didn't think much of it at the time. We finished eating and went back to fishing. The afternoon dragged on, and the sun started to dip behind the trees. It must have been around 4 or 5 when things started to feel off. The light was getting softer, casting long shadows, and the temperature dropped quickly. I remember shivering a bit, even with my waders on. We decided to pack up soon because we didn't want to be driving back in the dark on those winding roads. We were gathering our gear near the truck when it happened. I was stuffing my waders into the back of the truck, and my friend was coiling up his fly line, and then, out of nowhere, this scream ripped through the air. It came from right behind the truck, so close I could feel it in my bones. I'm not talking about a human scream or an animal I've ever heard. This was something else entirely. It was loud, like painfully loud, and it lasted for what felt like forever, but was probably about 10 seconds. It started low, almost like a roar, then rose into this high-pitched shriek that sounded full of rage. I swear it was so raw and angry that my whole body froze. My heart just slammed into my throat and I dropped the rod I was holding. My friend and I locked eyes, and I saw the same terror on his face. He mouthed, "What the hell was that?" But neither of us spoke. We just stood there listening. But the scream stopped as suddenly as it started. The silence that followed was even worse, thick and heavy, like the air was holding its breath. After a few seconds, my friend whispered, "Did we hit something?" We'd parked the truck earlier, and it was possible we'd run over an animal without noticing. But that scream didn't sound like any animal I know. It was too big, too intelligent, if that makes sense. We both rushed to the back of the truck, expecting to see a deer or something injured, but there was nothing. No blood, no fur, no sign of anything. The ground was dry and dusty, and our footprints were the only marks. We were standing there, confused and scared, when the second scream came. This one was farther away, maybe 100 yards or so, but it was even higher pitched and furious, like whatever it was had moved and was pissed off. It lasted another few seconds, and this time it felt like it was directed at us. I could hear the anger in it, a kind of primal rage that made the hair on my arms stand up. My friend grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in, and we both crouched down, like we were trying to make ourselves smaller. Then a third scream, shorter this time, and it came from near the river, even farther off. It was like whatever it was had moved again, heading toward the water. The sound was fainter but still clear, and it ended abruptly, leaving us in that deafening silence again. I remember my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold onto the truck. My friend was breathing fast, almost hyperventilating. We didn't say anything for a minute, just listened, but all we heard was the river and our own hearts pounding. The light was fading fast now, and the shadows were getting longer, making the trees look like twisted shapes. We decided we had to get out of there. We threw the rest of our gear into the truck, no careful packing, just tossing it in, and jumped into the cab. I fumbled with the keys, my fingers numb with fear, and finally got the engine started. We drove out of there fast, bouncing on the dirt road, not talking, just staring ahead. Every little noise, the crunch of gravel, the engine hum, made me jump. As we got closer to the main road, we saw lights from a couple of cabins nearby. One of them had people outside with flashlights, like they were looking for something. We pulled over, thinking maybe they'd heard it too and could explain what was going on. There was an older guy and a woman, probably in their 50s, standing in their driveway. The guy had a flashlight pointed at the ground, and he looked tense. I rolled down the window and said, "Hey, did you hear that screaming?" My voice was shaky, and I had to clear my throat. The guy looked at me, then at his wife, and shook his head. "Nah, probably just a rabbit. They make some weird noises sometimes." "A rabbit?" "I've heard rabbits. They squeal when they're scared, but nothing like what we heard. That was no rabbit. It was too loud, too long, too angry." I could tell he was lying or didn't want to talk about it. His wife looked nervous, avoiding eye contact. My friend leaned over and said, "That wasn't a rabbit. It sounded huge." The guy just shrugged and said, "Well, we didn't hear anything." Then he turned and walked back toward his cabin, like he was dismissing us. We drove off, feeling even more unsettled. Why would he lie? Did he hear it and not want to admit it, or was he trying to avoid scaring us? Whatever it was, it made the whole thing feel even more wrong. We had a cabin rented for the night about 10 minutes away, a small place tucked back in the trees. We got there as the last light was fading, and the place felt isolated and dark. We parked the truck right by the door and hurried inside. The cabin was rustic, wood panels, a small kitchen, and a couple of bedrooms. We locked the door behind us, but it didn't feel like enough. I remember my hands were still trembling as I turned on the lights. We didn't even unpack. We just sat at the kitchen table listening. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle outside made us jump. My friend kept peeking out the window, but it was pitch black out there. After a while, we decided to barricade the door. We pushed a heavy wooden chair against it and stacked some firewood from the fireplace in front of it. It probably wouldn't stop anything determined, but it made us feel a little safer. We didn't talk much, just sat there in the dim light, drinking water and trying to calm down. I kept replaying the screams in my head. The raw volume of the first one, so close it felt like it was right on top of us. The fury in the second one, like it was hunting or defending territory. And the third, shorter but still menacing, like it was moving away, but not gone. I've spent a lot of time outdoors, hiking, camping, fishing, and I've heard coyotes, bears, even mountain lions. None of them sound like that. This was different. It was intelligent, almost human-like in its emotion, but not human. My friend finally broke the silence. "What do you think it was?" he asked, his voice low. I shook my head. "I don't know, but it wasn't an animal. Not any animal I've ever heard." We both fell quiet again. The night dragged on, and we took turns staying awake, but neither of us slept much. I remember staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside, and every time it picked up, I'd tense up, thinking I heard something else. The next morning, we packed up and left early. We didn't even bother fishing again. On the drive back, we stopped at a diner in Mammoth and overheard some locals talking about strange noises in the area over the past few weeks. One guy mentioned something about Bigfoot sightings, but he said it like a joke. Still, it sent a chill down my spine. Later, when I got home, I started looking online and found forums where people shared similar stories from around the Owens River and the Sierra Nevada. Screams in the night, things moving in the trees, feelings of being watched. It made me realize we weren't alone in hearing those terrors, but that doesn't make it any less scary. In fact, it makes it worse because whatever it is, it's out there, and it's real. To this day, I can't explain what we heard. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear or a mountain lion, but it doesn't fit. The volume, the duration, the anger, it was something else. And that feeling of being threatened, like we were intruding on its space, has stuck with me. I haven't been back to that spot since, and I don't think I ever will. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I'll hear a noise and my heart will race, and I'll remember those screams. I don't think I'll ever forget them. Story 8. Okay, I'll try to write this. I don't talk about it much, not even to my brother David anymore. We just don't. It's one of those things you lock away because saying it out loud makes it real all over again, and it's already too real in my head. But I was 14 years old, and this happened in Orangeburg County, South Carolina, back in July of 1997. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because my mum had just gone back to work after being home for a few days with a summer cold. The day started normal, stupidly, boringly normal. It was hot, the kind of wet, heavy heat that makes the air feel like a blanket you can't take off. I'd been inside all day, parked in front of the fan in the living room, watching dumb talk shows and waiting for the sun to go down a little so it would be bearable to go outside. David was 2 years older than me, 16, and he was supposed to be mowing the lawn, but I think he was just hiding in his room, avoiding the heat and the work. We had 2 dogs in the backyard, Buddy and Sasha. Buddy was a big old mutt, part German Shepherd, part who knows what, and Sasha was this little terrier mix, all nerves and yapping. They were usually pretty chill in the afternoon, just finding a shady spot under the big oak tree to sleep. But around 4 o'clock, they started up. It wasn't their normal bark, not the "hey, a squirrel" bark or the mailman is here" bark. This was different. It was this frantic, high-pitched, panicked sound. Buddy's was a deep, scared woof, and Sasha's was just a continuous shrieking yelp. It went on for a few minutes, and I remember getting annoyed, thinking, what is their problem? I muted the TV, and that's when I could really hear it. It was the sound of pure fear, the sound an animal makes when it thinks it's about to die. I sighed and hauled myself off the couch. The linoleum floor was cool under my bare feet. I went to the back door, the one with the little window in it, and looked out. At first, I didn't see anything weird, just the backyard, the dog pen, which was really just a section of the yard, fenced off with chicken wire and some metal posts, the woods at the very back of our property line. The trees were thick there, a solid wall of green and shadow. Then I saw movement near the dog pen. I thought maybe it was one of the neighbor's cows that had gotten loose again. We lived out in the country. It happened. But this was bigger than a cow and darker. It was just a large black shape hunkered down by the fence. My brain tried to make it into a bear. We had black bears around sometimes, though they were usually shy. I opened the back door and stepped out onto the concrete porch. The heat hit me like a wall. The barking was deafening now. Sasha was throwing herself against the chicken wire, and Buddy was backing away, his tail between his legs, letting out these low, terrified growls. "Hey!" I yelled, squinting against the sun. "Get out of here!" The shape didn't move like a bear. It was upright. It had its back to me, and it was doing something with its arms. It was pulling on the chicken wire of the dog pen. Not like it was trying to get in, but like it was testing it, yanking on it hard with these long, powerful-looking arms. The whole section of fence was shaking. I took a few steps off the porch, onto the grass. My heart was starting to beat a little faster. This wasn't right. "Hey!" I yelled again, my voice sounding thinner now. That's when it stopped pulling on the fence. It went still, and then it turned. It didn't just turn its head. It turned its whole body, slow and deliberate, like it was on a swivel, and I saw it. I saw what it was. It was tall, so unbelievably tall, 8 feet, easy, maybe more. It was covered in shaggy black hair, matted and thick. But its face was different. The skin was bare, a leathery, dark brown color like old bark. It wasn't a monkey face. It wasn't a man's face. It was something else entirely. Its eyes were what got me first. They were big and round and a deep, solid brown, like pools of dark water. There was no white to them. They just stared right at me, and there was an intelligence in them. Not a human intelligence, but a sharp, knowing look. It was looking right through me. Its mouth was open a little, and I could see its teeth. They weren't pointed like a predator's. They were blocky, square almost, like little yellow-white bricks, all crammed together. It smelled. Oh God, it smelled. It was this musky, pungent odor like a wet goat mixed with old garbage, and something else, something wild and rotten. The smell hit me from 15 feet away, and it made my stomach turn. I saw details in that one, frozen second, that are burned into my brain. There were worn spots on its knees, patches where the hair was thin and the skin showed through, dark and calloused, like it spent a lot of time on all fours. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and its hands were huge, with thick fingers. It just stared at me, and I stared back. My mind went completely blank. There was no thought, no processing. It was just raw, primal terror. My body knew what to do before my brain did. I screamed. It wasn't a movie scream. It was a short, choked gasp of air that ripped out of my throat, a sound I didn't even know I could make, and then I ran. I spun around so fast I almost fell, my bare feet slipping on the grass. I didn't look back. I just ran for the back door. I could hear my own blood roaring in my ears, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to break out. The distance from the yard to the porch felt like a mile. I scrambled up the steps, yanked the screen door open, and fell into the kitchen, slamming the heavy wooden door shut behind me. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking so bad I could barely turn the little knob. I was breathing in these huge, ragged gulps, leaning against the door like I could hold the whole world out. That's when I heard my brother's voice. "Jackie, what the hell was that?" I turned around. David was standing at the entrance to the living room, his eyes wide. He'd heard me scream. I couldn't form words. I just pointed a trembling finger towards the back door. "Out. Out there," I managed to choke out. He didn't hesitate. David might have picked on me sometimes, but he was my big brother. He ran to the door and looked out the little window. I saw his body go rigid. His face, reflected in the glass of the kitchen cabinet, went pale. "Holy shit," he whispered. He didn't say anything else for a few seconds, just stared. Then he slowly backed away from the door. "What is that?" "I don't know," I sobbed. I was crying now, tears streaming down my face, mixing with the snot from my panic. I was shaking all over. We both stood there in the silent kitchen, listening. The dogs had stopped barking. It was dead quiet. That was almost worse. The sudden silence was heavy, pressing in on us. David, being braver than me, or maybe just more curious, crept back to the window. He peered out again, his hand on the lock like he was ready to slam it shut if he had to. "It's looking at the house," he said, his voice low and tense. "It's just standing there, looking right this way." I didn't want to know. I covered my ears and squeezed my eyes shut, but I could still see that face, those dark eyes. I could still smell that goat stink in my nose. I felt like I was going to be sick. Then David said, "It's moving." I uncovered my ears. Where? Towards the woods. I forced myself to get up and go to the window. I had to see. I had to know it was leaving. I stood next to David, my shoulder touching his, and looked out. It was walking away towards the tree line. It didn't run. It moved with this strange, powerful gait, its long arms swinging. It was even bigger from the back, a massive silhouette against the green of the forest. Just before it reached the shadows of the trees, it stopped and turned its head, looking back at the house one more time. I couldn't see its eyes from that distance, but I could feel it looking. I could feel its gaze, and then it made a sound. It wasn't a roar, it wasn't a scream. It was a low, guttural grunt, a deep hun sound that seemed to vibrate right through the door and into my bones. It was a sound of pure power. Then it turned and, in two huge strides, disappeared into the woods. It just melted into the shadows. Gone. The backyard was empty. The dogs were quiet. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and our own shaky breathing. We didn't go outside for the rest of the day. We called our mom at work, but what could we say? We just said the dogs were acting weird and we were scared, and she told us to lock the doors and she'd be home in a couple of hours. We didn't tell her the truth. Not then. When she got home, we tried to explain. We stumbled over our words, talking about a big black animal, a bear that walked on two legs, something that wasn't right. She looked at us like we were crazy. She went out back and looked around. Of course, there was nothing there, no tracks. The grass was too dry, nothing. But David and I knew we had both seen it. We compared notes later that night, whispering in my room after our mom had gone to bed. The bald brown face, the blocky teeth, the smell, the worn spots on its knees. We had seen the same thing. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the trees outside my window made me jump. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, seeing those dark, round eyes every time I closed my own. The next day, my dad came over. My parents were divorced, and he and David walked the tree line. They didn't go far in. My dad came back looking serious. He said he didn't see any sign of a bear, but he did find a place where some of the underbrush was flattened down, and a few low branches were broken off at a height he said was way too high for any bear I've ever seen. He never said what he thought it was. He just told us to be careful if we went into the woods. We never saw it again. The dogs never barked like that again. Life eventually went back to normal, or as normal as it could be. But something changed in me that day. I lost a piece of my innocence. The world became a bigger, darker, and much, much stranger place. I'm a grown woman now. I have a family of my own. But sometimes on a hot, still July night, when the smell of the earth is just right, I'll catch a whiff of something on the air, a musky, goat-like smell, and my heart will stop for a second, and I'll remember the way it turned its whole body to look at me. I'll remember the feeling of those eyes, and I'll know, with a cold certainty that has never left me, that we are not alone out here, that there are things in the woods that don't have names, things that watch us from the shadows, and we have no idea what they are. Story 9, Mana. Okay, I'm just going to type this out. I've never posted anything like this before, but I've been reading this forum for a while, and I guess I finally feel like I have to get it off my chest. I don't expect everyone to believe me. Honestly, if I read this a few years ago, I'm not sure I would have believed it either. But it happened. I was there. And not a single day has gone by since where I don't think about it, especially when I'm trying to fall asleep. My name's Travis. I'm from Boise. I've been backpacking since I was a kid. My dad had me out in the woods with a pack almost as soon as I could walk. It's my happy place, or it was. This happened in June of 2016. Me and my buddy Mark, we'd been planning this trip for months. We both had a solid week off work, and we decided to go deep into the Sawtooth National Forest. Not the popular trails, the ones you see on postcards. We wanted real backcountry, the kind of place where you might not see another person for the entire trip. We drove out on a Tuesday morning, got to the trailhead around noon. The weather was perfect, sunny but not too hot. The air smelled like pine and warm earth. We shouldered our packs. They were heavy. We were planning on being out for 5 days and started hiking. The first few miles were easy, just following a well-worn path along a creek. But then we turned off, onto a game trail I'd found on a topo map. That's when the real work began. The climb was steep, and the air got thinner. We were both in good shape, but you still feel it in your lungs. We hiked for maybe 5-6 hours that day. The plan was to get deep enough in that we'd have a good base camp for exploring the surrounding ridges. We found a spot just as the sun was starting to dip behind the mountains. It was a small clearing right next to the creek we'd been following. It was perfect. Flat ground, soft with pine needles, surrounded by these huge fir trees that blocked most of the wind. You could hear the water bubbling over the rocks. It was the kind of place that makes you feel like you're the only person left on Earth. We set up the tent, a good 3-season dome tent we'd used for years. We gathered some dry wood and got a fire going, cooked up some dehydrated chili, and just sat there, talking about nothing, watching the stars come out. There's no light pollution out there. The sky is just packed with them, a thick, milky smear right overhead. It was so quiet. The normal sounds, the creek, the slight breeze in the tops of the firs, the occasional chirp of a cricket, it was peaceful. We let the fire die down to embers, doused it thoroughly with creek water until it was just a wet black pile, and then we crawled into the tent. I remember zipping up the fly and thinking, this is going to be a great trip. I fell asleep pretty much instantly, the kind of dead-to-the-world sleep you only get after a long day of hiking. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was the middle of the night. Pitch black, and the first thing I noticed was the silence. It was wrong. It was a heavy, thick silence. The creek was still running. I could hear it if I strained, but everything else was gone. No wind, no insects, nothing. It was like the forest was holding its breath. I was lying on my back, and I remember just staring up at the dark ceiling of the tent, my heart starting to thump a little harder. I've woken up in the woods 1,000 times. It's never that quiet. Then I heard it, a sharp crack, the sound of a branch breaking, a big one, not a twig snapping under a deer's hoof. This was a loud, wet crack, like a dead limb being ripped right off a tree. It came from maybe 30-40 yards away, off to the left of the tent. My whole body went tense. I held my breath, listening. Mark was still asleep next to me, breathing evenly. Then another crack, closer. And then I heard the steps. It's hard to describe the sound. They were heavy, really heavy. Each step was a slow, deliberate thump. It wasn't the quick, light patter of a deer or an elk. This was a weight that made the ground vibrate. I could feel it through the floor of the tent, a faint tremor with every step. It was rhythmic. Thump, pause, thump, pause. It was walking on 2 legs. I know how that sounds, but I'm telling you, it was a bipedal gait. I've spent my whole life in the woods. I know what a bear sounds like on 4 legs. This was different. Mark stirred next to me. "Travis?" he whispered, his voice thick with sleep. "You hear that?" "Yeah," I whispered back. My mouth was dry. The steps kept circling. They'd move away for a few steps, then come back. It was pacing, just outside the ring of trees that surrounded our clearing. We were both sitting up now, frozen, just listening. The sound was so low and deep it felt like it was in my chest. Then we heard the breathing. It was a deep, wet, guttural sound, like something with a huge chest, breathing through a stuffed-up nose, a sort of huff, huff, snort sound. It was close, too close. It was right there, just beyond the thin nylon wall of the tent. The smell hit us a second later. It's a smell I'll never forget. Musky, like a wet dog, but 1,000 times stronger, mixed with something else, something rotten and earthy like old meat and damp soil. It was so potent it made my eyes water. The tent filled with the stench. My hands were shaking. I fumbled for my flashlight, a heavy-duty LED one. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might break one. I had to see, I had to know what was out there. "Don't!" Mark hissed, his hand grabbing my arm. His grip was vice-tight. I shook him off. I had to know. I slowly, carefully unzipped the small mesh window on the side of the tent, facing the direction of the sounds. The zipper sounded deafeningly loud in the silence. I clicked the flashlight on and swept the beam across the trees. For a second there was nothing, just the dark trunks and the black spaces between them. Then the beam caught something. Between 2 thick firs, about 20 yards away, was a shape. It was huge. It was standing upright, and it was just massive. Broad, rounded shoulders that seemed to blend into a thick, dark torso. I couldn't see legs. They were obscured by undergrowth, but it was tall. Really tall. The beam of my light reflected off 2 points of light where its eyes should be. They weren't glowing, but they caught the light, a faint, dull amber color. It was just standing there facing us. Then it turned its head. It was a slow, deliberate movement. It didn't jerk or startle, it just turned its head to the side, as if it was looking back over its shoulder, away from the light. And then it took a step, and it was gone. It just melted back into the shadows between the trees. It moved with a silence that was terrifying after the heavy footfalls. 1 second it was there, the next it was just gone. I dropped the flashlight. It hit the floor of the tent with a thud and went out, plunging us back into total darkness. "What did you see?" Mark whispered, his voice trembling. "Travis, what was it?" I couldn't answer. My throat was locked shut. I just sat there, shaking. That's when the real terror started. The heavy footfalls started up again, but faster now. They were circling the tent, not just pacing at a distance anymore. They were right on top of us. I could hear the brush of something against the nylon wall, a heavy, dragging brush. The whole tent shuddered. It felt like someone was pushing against the side of it. Mark and I scrambled to the middle, back to back, just staring at the walls as they bulged slightly inward with each pass. Then the knocking started. It was a hard, percussive sound, wood on wood, like someone was taking a thick branch and smacking it against a tree trunk. Whack, whack, whack. It came from right behind the tent. It wasn't a random sound. It was a pattern. 3 knocks, a pause, then 2 knocks. A few seconds later, from way off in the distance, maybe a quarter-mile up the ridge, another set of knocks answered. 2 knocks, a pause, then 3 knocks. My blood ran cold. They were communicating. This went on for what felt like an eternity. The pacing, the brushing against the tent, the overwhelming musky stench, and the knocks. Sometimes they'd come from one side, sometimes from another, always answered from somewhere else. There was more than one. We were surrounded. At one point, we heard a loud splash from the creek, like a big rock had been thrown in. Then, from the ridge directly above us, a sound erupted that I can't even properly describe. It wasn't a roar, not like a bear. It was deeper, more guttural. It was a long, drawn-out bellow that started low and rose in pitch, a sound of pure, raw power that echoed through the entire valley. It was the loudest thing I have ever heard in my life. It vibrated in my teeth. After it ended, the silence felt even heavier than before. We were crying. I'm not ashamed to admit it. We were 2 grown men, experienced outdoorsmen, and we were huddled in the middle of that tent, sobbing quietly from sheer, unadulterated terror. We weren't being hunted. That's not what it felt like. It felt like we were being toyed with. It felt intelligent. It was a display, a show of force. It was letting us know in no uncertain terms that we were in its home, and it wanted us to know we weren't welcome. That was the worst part. The feeling of being controlled. We were prisoners in that little nylon bubble. We couldn't run. We couldn't hide. All we could do was sit there and wait for the sun to come up, listening to these things move around us, communicating, letting us know they were there. Every second was an hour. Every sound was a potential attack that never came. The anticipation was a physical pain. I don't know how long it went on. Hours. The knocks became less frequent. The pacing stopped. The smell began to fade. The forest sounds slowly started to come back. First a cricket, then the gentle rustle of the wind in the trees. The sky through the mesh window of the tent began to turn from black to a deep, dark blue. When the first real rays of sunlight hit the tent, we still didn't move. We just sat there, exhausted, shell-shocked. It was Mark who finally unzipped the tent door and peered out. "It's light out," he said, his voice hoarse. We crawled out, stiff and sore. The world looked the same. The creek was bubbling. The sun was warming the air. Birds were chirping. It was a beautiful June morning, but everything felt different. That's when we saw the tracks. They were everywhere, all around the tent, in a perfect, disturbing circle. They were barefoot prints. Humanoid, but not human. They were massive. I pulled out a tape measure from my pack. The ones right next to the tent were over 17 inches long, and they were deep, sunk into the soft ground, showing immense weight. The toes were broad, and the stride was huge, and there were 2 distinct sizes. One set was bigger, one was slightly smaller, at least 2 individuals. We followed the tracks a little way into the trees. We found a young sapling, maybe 3 inches thick, that had been snapped in half, not chewed, not broken by wind. It was snapped cleanly, about 4 feet off the ground. There were deep gouges in the bark of a bigger tree nearby, way higher than I could reach. We were both just standing there, staring at the evidence. It was real. It had all been real. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely operate my camera, but I took pictures of the tracks, of the broken tree. We packed up our gear in a frantic hurry, not even bothering to properly organize anything, just stuffing it all into our packs. We got out of there. We hiked the entire way back to the truck without stopping once, without speaking. We just walked as fast as we could, constantly looking over our shoulders. About a mile from the trailhead, we both heard it at the same time, faint but clear in the quiet morning air, from a ridge far behind us. Whack, whack, whack. A final set of 3 knocks. We didn't even look at each other. We just started practically running. We showed the pictures to a biologist friend later. He said they were probably bear prints, distorted by melting or something. He said the tree could have been broken by a falling branch. He had an explanation for everything. We just nodded and didn't argue. We knew what we had seen. We knew what we had heard. We knew what had surrounded us that night. I haven't been on a real backcountry trip since. I stick to state parks now, places with other people around. Mark moved to Phoenix a year later. We don't talk about it much. We don't have to. Sometimes when I'm lying in my bed at home, in my quiet suburban neighborhood in Boise, I'll hear a branch crack outside my window, or the house will settle, and my whole body will go rigid. My heart will start that same frantic pounding. I'll lie there in the dark, listening, waiting, and I can still smell that musky, rotten stench in my memory. I know what's out there in the deep woods, and I know it knows we're here. Story 10. Okay, so this happened to me and my hunting partner a few years back, and I've never really talked about it with anyone else because, honestly, it sounds crazy. But after hearing some stuff on TV recently, I feel like I need to get it out there. Maybe someone else has been through something similar. We were up on the Grand Mesa in Colorado, near Carson Lake. It was one of those perfect fall days, cool but not too cold, the kind where the air smells like pine and damp earth, and the leaves are just starting to turn. We'd spent the whole day hiking and hunting, but we hadn't had much luck, mostly just enjoyed being out in the woods, you know? By the time we got back to our campsite, the sun was dipping behind the trees, casting long shadows across the lake. The water was still and dark like glass, and the only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of a bird settling in for the night. We set up camp in a small clearing about 50 yards from the lake's edge. It was a spot we'd used before, familiar and comfortable. I started unpacking the gear while my partner got a fire going. We were both tired, but in a good way. The kind of tired that comes from a full day outdoors. I remember the smell of wood smoke mixing with the scent of the stew we were heating up for dinner. It was one of those freeze-dried backpacking meals, but after a long day, it smelled like heaven. We were just sitting down to eat when my partner froze. He had this look on his face, like he'd just heard something he couldn't place. He held up a hand, signaling me to be quiet. At first, I thought he was messing with me. We've been friends for years, and he's always been the jumpy one in the group, but then I heard it too. It was a sound I'd never heard before, not like a bear or a mountain lion, which I've encountered plenty of times out here. This was different. It started low, a deep rumble that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then it rose into this high-pitched scream that made the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't constant. It would go on for a few seconds, then stop for a beat, then start up again, like it was repeating itself, but each time it felt angrier, more intense. The pauses were short, just enough to make you think it was over. Then it would rip through the silence again. My partner looked at me, his eyes wide. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. I could see the fear in his face, and honestly, I felt it too. But I tried to play it cool. "Probably just a mountain lion," I said. "Or maybe bears fighting. You know how they get territorial." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't right. I've heard mountain lions scream. It's eerie, but this was deeper, louder, like it was coming from something much bigger. And bears, they growl and roar, but this was a scream that felt almost human, but not quite. It was raw, primal. The sound kept going and it was getting closer. I could feel it in my chest, this vibration that made my teeth ache. The fire crackled and the normal night sounds, the crickets, the owls, had gone completely silent. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. My partner was gripping his rifle so tight his knuckles were white. "We should do something," he said, his voice shaky. I stood up, trying to act brave. "I'll scare it off," I said, and I fired a shot into the air. The bang echoed across the lake, loud and sharp. For a second, everything went quiet. The screaming stopped. I felt a rush of relief. "See?" I said. "Just spooked it." But the silence only lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then the screaming started again, and this time it was louder, way louder, and it sounded angry, like whatever it was, I'd pissed it off. The sound was closer now, coming from the far side of the lake, and I could see the brush over there moving, not like a small animal. This was something big, shaking the branches and making the whole area seem alive with motion. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I could feel the sweat on my palms, and my mouth went dry. This wasn't normal. Animals usually run from gunshots, but this thing didn't. It came back stronger, like it was challenging us. The screams were rising and falling, each one making me flinch. They were so deep they seemed to shake the ground, and the high parts felt like they were piercing my ears. My partner was on his feet now, packing stuff into his backpack frantically. "We need to go, now," he said, and his voice was tight with panic. I've never seen him like that before. He's ex-military, used to keeping his cool under pressure, but right then, he looked like a scared kid, and I felt the same way. That's when the real terror hit me. This wasn't just some animal we could scare off. This was something else, and it wasn't backing down. I started helping him pack, my hands trembling so bad I could barely zip up the tent bag. We were throwing everything into the truck. Sleeping bags, coolers, the half-eaten stew pot still steaming. The screams kept coming, and now they were even closer. I could hear branches snapping, like something was moving through the trees toward us. Not running, but walking deliberately, like it knew where we were. The air felt thick, heavy, with this sense of being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but it was getting dark, and the trees were just shadows. The fire cast flickering light, making everything seem even more sinister. I remember the smell of pine and smoke, but underneath it, there was this other smell. Musky, like wet fur and dirt. It made my stomach turn. We finished packing in what felt like seconds, but it was probably more like 5 minutes. It was a blur of motion and fear. My partner jumped into the driver's seat, and I scrambled into the passenger side, slamming the door shut. He started the engine, and the headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the path back to the main road. As we pulled away, I looked back at the campsite. The fire was still burning, and for a moment, I thought I saw something moving at the edge of the trees, a tall, dark shape, but it was gone before I could focus on it. We drove down the access road, gravel crunching under the tires. The screams had stopped as soon as we left, but the silence was almost worse. It felt heavy, oppressive. After about a mile, my partner slowed down and pulled over. "Let's listen," he said, turning off the engine. We rolled down the windows, and the cold night air rushed in. We sat there for what felt like forever, just listening, but there was nothing. No screams, no sounds at all. Not even the wind. It was like the forest had gone dead. We didn't say much on the drive back. Every shadow on the road made me jump, and I kept expecting to hear that scream again. My hands were still shaking, and I had this knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. We got back to town late, and we just went our separate ways with a quick nod. No, see you later, no plans to talk about it. It was like we both knew that if we didn't acknowledge it, maybe it wouldn't be real. For weeks after that, I felt on edge. Every noise at night would make me sit up in bed, heart racing. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear with some kind of injury or a weird echo from the mountains, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. That sound was too unique, too purposeful. Then, a couple of years later, I was watching TV late one night, and there was a show about Bigfoot. They played recordings of alleged Sasquatch calls, and my blood ran cold. It was the same sound, that deep, rising and falling scream with those short pauses. I sat there frozen, my heart pounding like it did that night. It was confirmation, but it didn't make me feel better. If anything, it made it worse, because now I knew that other people had heard it too, and they couldn't explain it either. To this day, I've never gone back to that spot. My partner and I still hunt together sometimes, but we've never talked about what happened. It's like this unspoken thing between us. And every time I think about it, I get that same chill, that feeling of being watched by something I can't understand. I don't know what it was, but I know it was real, and I know it scared the hell out of me. Story 11. So, this happened a few years ago when I was still living in Bishop, California. My sister and I decided to go camping at the Sawmill Walk-In Campground, which is right on the eastern edge of Yosemite National Park. We'd been there before. It's this quiet, kind of remote spot where you can really get away from everything, no cell service, just the woods and the stars. We both love the outdoors, and it was supposed to be a chill weekend to unwind after a rough couple of months. I remember packing up the car that morning, the sun already warm on my skin, and the drive out there felt normal, you know, just us joking around, windows down, music playing, nothing out of the ordinary. We got to the campground around noon. The place was pretty empty. Only a couple of other sites were taken, which was perfect for us. We picked a spot nestled in among some tall pines with a clear view of the canyon to the west. Setting up the tent was the usual hassle. I always forget how tricky those poles can be, and my sister was laughing at me, fumbling with them. The air smelled like pine needles and dry earth, that crisp mountain scent that makes you feel alive. We spent the afternoon hiking a nearby trail, nothing too strenuous, just following a path that wound through the trees. I remember noticing how quiet it was, even then. Not in a creepy way, just peaceful. Birds chirping, the occasional rustle of squirrels, but no people noise. It felt like we had the whole forest to ourselves. By late afternoon, we were back at camp, and I started gathering wood for a fire while my sister got dinner ready. We'd brought hot dogs and beans, the classic camping meal. The sky was starting to turn those shades of orange and pink, and the temperature dropped fast. That's how it is up there, warm in the day, chilly as soon as the sun dips. We ate sitting on logs we'd dragged over, the fire crackling between us. It was cozy, you know, just the two of us talking about stupid stuff, work, friends, whatever. I felt relaxed, totally at ease. Then, as it got darker, things started to feel different. Not in an obvious way, but subtle. The forest got quieter, like the birds had stopped singing earlier than usual, and the crickets hadn't started up yet. I didn't think much of it at first, just figured it was the time of day. But my sister mentioned it too. She said, "It's weird how quiet it is, isn't it?" And I nodded, shrugging it off. We kept talking, but I could feel this little knot forming in my stomach, like when you sense something's off, but you can't put your finger on it. The sun had fully set by then, and the only light came from our fire, casting flickering shadows on the trees around us. The air was cool, and I pulled my jacket tighter. We were just sitting there, staring into the flames, not saying much when it happened. Out of nowhere, from the canyon to the west, this sound cut through the silence. It wasn't like anything I've ever heard before. It started as a low, rising whoop, deep and guttural, like it was building from the ground up, and then it shifted into this long, drawn-out howl that echoed through the trees. The whoop had a pattern to it, almost musical, but in a way that felt wrong, unnatural, It wasn't a coyote or a bear or anything I could recognize from growing up around here. Coyotes yip and howl in packs, and bears might grunt or roar, but this was different. It was too clear, too deliberate, like it was meant to be heard. The moment it faded, the forest went dead silent. I mean completely silent. Not a single cricket chirped, no wind rustling the leaves, nothing. It was so quiet I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and I felt this cold sweat break out on my back. I looked at my sister, and her face was pale, eyes wide. She didn't say anything, just stared into the darkness toward the canyon. We both froze, not moving a muscle. That silence lasted for what felt like forever, but it was probably only a few seconds. Then, slowly, the normal sound started creeping back. First a faint cricket, then the whisper of wind, but it was hesitant, like the forest was holding its breath too. I remember my hands were shaking as I reached for the fire poker, not that it would do much good against whatever made that noise. My sister finally whispered, "What was that?" And her voice was so quiet, it was almost swallowed by the crackle of the fire. I shook my head, because I had no idea. We both knew the local wildlife. We'd spent years hiking and camping in these mountains. But this was something else. It didn't fit. The sound was too big, too powerful, and that silence afterward, that's what got me. It was like everything in the forest recognized it and shut up out of fear. I've never experienced anything like that before or since. We stayed by the fire after that, not daring to move. Every little noise made us jump. A twig snapping, the fire popping. I kept scanning the tree line, half expecting to see something moving in the shadows. The darkness felt thicker, heavier, like it was pressing in on us. My sister huddled closer, and we didn't talk much, just listened. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through me, making my skin tingle. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a weird bird or some trick of the wind, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. That sound had intention behind it, like it was communicating something, and the way the forest reacted, that wasn't normal. The night dragged on, and we didn't sleep. We just sat there, feeding the fire, keeping it bright. Every so often I'd think I heard something, a rustle in the bushes, a low growl, but it was probably just my imagination running wild. Still, the fear was real. I've never felt so exposed, so small in the face of the unknown. It reinforced this belief I've always had, that there are things out here in the wild places, things we can't explain, that don't fit into our neat categories. Bigfoot, or whatever people call it. I never put much stock in that stuff before, but in that moment, it didn't seem so far-fetched. As the hours passed, the sky started to lighten with the first hints of dawn. The normal sounds of the forest returned fully, birds waking up, squirrels chattering, and the tension slowly eased. But that feeling stayed with me, this deep unease. We packed up our camp quickly once it was fully light, not even bothering with breakfast, just threw everything in the car and got out of there. Driving back to Bishop, we didn't talk about it much, but I could tell my sister was just as shaken as I was. Even now, years later, I still get chills thinking about that night. I've told a few people, but most just shrug it off as some animal noise. But I know what I heard, and I know how it felt. That silence after the sound, that's what haunts me. It's like the forest knew something we didn't, and I'll never forget it. Take story 12, I'll ask another. Okay, so I've never actually typed this all out before. I've told a couple of close friends bits and pieces, but never the whole thing, and never online. Honestly, just thinking about it again makes my hands feel a little cold. But here goes. This happened back in October of the year 2000. I remember the date because it was a milestone for us. My wife and I had just finished building a cabin on our property in Ohio. It wasn't a huge estate or anything, just 12 wooded acres we'd saved up for. The main cabin was ours, and we just put the finishing touches on a smaller second one, more like a bunkhouse for guests. To celebrate, we had a bunch of friends over for the weekend. It was one of those perfect, crisp autumn days where the air smells like wood smoke and dead leaves. The sky was that deep, clear blue you only seem to get in October. We had a fire going in the pit out back, music playing from a battery-powered stereo, everyone drinking beer and just laughing. It was a good day, a really good day. The kind you take pictures of in your mind so you can remember it later. I remember feeling so proud, standing there looking at the new cabin, this little building we'd built with our own hands. It felt like we'd really accomplished something. As the sun went down and the fire got brighter, the stories started. You know how it is. Ghost stories, weird stuff. My wife, she's not a bullshitter. She's the most grounded person I know. But she told this story about something she saw a few years before we bought the land, back when we were just looking at the property. She was walking the tree line by herself, and she saw this thing, this large, dark shape, just moving through the trees further in. She said it was way too big to be a man, and it moved all wrong, like it was gliding more than walking. She said it stopped and turned its head, and even from a distance, she felt this primal dread, like a cold hand just squeezed her heart. She got out of there fast and never went back into that part of the woods alone. We'd all heard the story before, and most of us just shrugged it off. A bear, maybe, or a trick of the light. But there was this one woman there, a friend of a friend. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah was a skeptic through and through. You know the type, super smart, a scientist, believed in what she could see and measure. She listened to my wife's story with this little smirk on her face. She didn't say anything rude, but you could tell she thought it was all nonsense, a bunch of hicks scaring themselves in the woods. The party started to wind down. It was getting late, probably past midnight. People were pairing off, figuring out where to sleep. The main cabin had our bedroom and a pull-out couch, and the new small cabin had 2 twin beds. It was cozy, but finished. The plan was for a couple to take the small cabin, but Sarah, maybe to prove a point about how she wasn't scared of some campfire story, said she'd be fine sleeping out there by herself. She said she liked the quiet. I remember the look on her face, this confident, almost challenging look like, "See, I'm not afraid of your imaginary monster." I didn't think much of it. I helped her carry her bag over. The small cabin was maybe 50, 60 yards from the main one, down a little gravel path. There's no outside light out there, so I left the porch light on the main cabin on to give her some light to see by. The truck was parked in the driveway, kind of between the 2 cabins, but closer to the small one. I remember the way the light from our porch hit the side of the truck, making the red paint look almost black. I said goodnight, told her there were extra blankets in the trunk at the foot of the bed, and I walked back to the main cabin. I was inside for maybe 10 seconds. I'm not even joking. I had just closed the door, turned to my wife to say something, and then we heard it. A scream. Not a startled yell, not a shout. This was a raw, tearing, absolute terror kind of scream. It was so loud and so sharp it felt like it physically hit me in the chest. It cut off almost as soon as it started, but that sound hung in the air. For a half second, everything was frozen. Then my brain caught up. Sarah, I didn't think. I just moved. I yanked the door open and sprinted out onto the porch. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The porch light was still on, casting that same yellow pool of light, and there she was. Sarah was standing maybe 15 feet from the small cabin's door, just on the edge of the light. She wasn't moving. She was just standing there, rigid, her back to me, facing the direction of my truck. I yelled her name, "Sarah!" She didn't turn. I ran down the porch steps and toward her. The gravel crunched under my feet, sounding impossibly loud in the sudden silence. As I got closer, I could see she was trembling. Not just shivering, but a full-body shake, like she was plugged into a wall socket. I put a hand on her shoulder, and she flinched so hard I thought she was going to fall over. She finally turned her head to look at me, and I will never, ever forget her face. Her eyes were wide, but they weren't seeing me. They were staring through me, locked on some horror that was still right in front of her. Her skin was the color of chalk. Her mouth was open slightly, but no sound was coming out. She was gasping for air in these little ragged hitches. "Sarah, what is it? What happened?" My own voice sounded thin and scared. She lifted a hand. It was shaking so badly she could barely control it. She pointed a trembling finger toward my truck. Her voice, when it finally came, was a dry, broken whisper. It didn't even sound like her. "There," she choked out, "by the truck." I looked. I stared right at my truck. The driver's side was facing us. At first I didn't see anything, just the dark shadow of the forest behind it. The night was quiet. No crickets, no owls, nothing. It was that heavy, waiting kind of silence. "What? What was it?" I asked, my eyes scanning back and forth. She was still pointing, her whole arm shaking. A figure, big grey. It was just standing there. My brain was trying to catch up. A person? Had someone wandered onto the property? A man? I asked, my voice low. She shook her head, a quick, frantic motion. No, too big, 6 feet, 7 feet, just standing there, looking at me. I kept staring at the truck. I was searching for any movement, any shape that shouldn't be there. But there was nothing, just the familiar outline of the Ford, the darkness of the woods behind it. "Where did it go?" I whispered. She finally dropped her hand, wrapping her arms around herself. She was starting to cry now, silent tears streaming down her face. It was just there. And then it was gone. It didn't run, it didn't move, it was just there, and then it wasn't. That's when the real cold started to seep into me. It wasn't the night air. This was a deep internal chill. If it had run away, I could have rationalized it. A trespasser, a drunk, whatever, but just vanishing. My wife's story from hours earlier flashed into my mind, the large, dark shape moving all wrong. By now, the others had come out from the main cabin. My wife had a big maglite flashlight. She ran over to us, her face tight with worry. "What's going on? Are you okay?" Sarah couldn't answer. She just shook her head and kept crying, this quiet, hopeless sound. I took the flashlight from my wife. She saw something. By the truck. I clicked the flashlight on. The powerful beam cut through the darkness, sweeping over the gravel, the side of the truck, the tires, nothing. I walked forward slowly, my senses on a razor's edge. Every little noise, the crunch of my feet, the rustle of my jacket, sounded amplified. I was expecting something to leap out at me from the shadows. My skin was crawling. I shone the light all around the truck, under it, in the bed. Nothing. I walked a wider circle, the beam probing into the tree line. The leaves were thick on the ground. If something big had run through them, there would be a mess, broken branches, something. There was nothing. It was just the undisturbed forest floor. We got Sarah inside the main cabin. She was in a state of shock. We sat her on the couch and wrapped a blanket around her. She wouldn't let go of my wife's hand. Her grip was so tight, her knuckles were white. She just kept staring straight ahead, those wide, unblinking eyes seeing something we couldn't. We tried to ask her more, to get details, but she'd just shake her head or let out another sob. The confident, skeptical woman from a few hours ago was completely gone. In her place was this terrified, broken person that more than anything scared the hell out of me. You can't fake that. You can't act that. That was a fear that comes from your soul being scared right out of your body. After about 20 minutes of this, one of my friends, a guy who was into this kind of stuff, suggested we call someone. He had the number for some kind of investigator, a guy who looked into weird sightings and stuff. It felt stupid, calling some stranger in the middle of the night. But we were out of ideas. What were we supposed to do? Call the cops and say a big grey ghost was by my truck? They'd have laughed at us. The guy on the phone was calm. He listened to my fractured explanation. Friend saw a tall figure, grey, vanished. He asked a few questions. How tall exactly? What was the build? Any smell? Any sound? I had to put Sarah on the phone, but she could barely speak. She just kept whispering, "It was just looking at me." He told us to stay inside, keep the doors locked, and that he'd come out first thing in the morning. The rest of the night was the longest of my life. Nobody slept. We all sat in the main room listening. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind made us jump. The flashlight was on the table next to me, my hand never far from it. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? The festive mood was gone, replaced by this thick, suffocating dread. The cabin that had felt so safe and warm just hours before now felt flimsy, like a cardboard box in the dark. When the sun finally came up, it was a grey, gloomy morning. The investigator showed up, a normal-looking guy in his 40s. He walked the property with me. We went over every inch of the ground around the truck and the small cabin. He was thorough. He looked for footprints, hair, anything. But the ground was hard and dry. There was nothing. No broken twigs, no impressions, no strange marks. It was just nothing. He talked to Sarah for a long time inside. When he came out, his expression was serious. He said that based on her description, the height, the grayish color, the way it seemed to just disappear, and the total lack of any physical evidence, it fit the profile of a lot of other reports he'd taken. He didn't say the word. He didn't have to. We all knew what he meant. Sarah left that day with the friends she came with. She never spent another night on our property. For years after, if we saw her at a party or something, she'd be fine until someone brought up the cabins or the woods. Then she'd just go quiet. Her face would get that pale, distant look again, and she'd find an excuse to leave the room or change the subject. She never, ever talked about it. Not with me, not with my wife, not with anyone as far as I know. And that's the thing that convinced me, more than anything else, the complete and total transformation of a person, the utter demolition of her skepticism. She didn't just see a shadow. She didn't just get spooked. She saw something that looked back at her, something that shouldn't exist. And in that one single moment, in the space of maybe 10 seconds between me closing my door and her screaming, her entire understanding of the world was ripped right out from under her. I still own that property. I still go out to the cabin. But I never, ever walk to that small cabin at night without a light. And I always look toward the spot by my truck first. Every single time. I look, and for a split second, I'm not a grown man in the 21st century. I'm just a primitive thing in the dark, hoping nothing is looking back. Story 13? It was one of those early September days that feels like summer's last stand. The air was warm and thick, but there was this little bite underneath it, a promise that the suffocating heat wouldn't last forever. Me and my cousin, we were leasing this patch of hunting land just outside of Sio. It wasn't huge, maybe 150 acres, but it was ours to manage, to get ready for deer season. That day, the 4th, our job was simple. Clear out some of the overgrown four-wheeler trails that had gotten choked with brambles and new growth over the summer. We'd been at it since mid-morning. The sound of our two-stroke engine and the thwack of our machetes was the only music we had. We'd take turns, one driving the four-wheeler slowly, the other walking alongside, hacking away at the green stuff, grabbing at our jeans. We were sweating through our t-shirts, drinking warm water from bottles we'd left in the shade. It was just work. Hard, boring, satisfying in that way physical labor can be. You see the trail open up behind you, a clean path through the mess. I remember I was taking a break, leaning against the four-wheeler's rack, just breathing heavy. My cousin was a few yards ahead, chopping at a stubborn blackberry bush. I was looking at the ground, at my dusty boots, and that's when I noticed it. Or, I guess, when I noticed the lack of it. The woods had gone quiet. It's a cliché, I know. People always say that in scary stories. The woods went silent. But until you've experienced it, you don't get it. It's not just a little quieter. It's a vacuum. An hour before, the place was buzzing with life. Squirrels were chattering, throwing acorns down from the hickories. Birds were everywhere. Blue jays squawking, woodpeckers hammering, little chirps and tweets from the underbrush. It was a noisy, busy place. And then, between one breath and the next, it all just stopped. It was like someone threw a soundproof blanket over the entire valley. I stood up straight. "Hey," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the new stillness. My cousin stopped chopping and looked back at me. "What? You hear that?" He listened. His face, which was red and sweaty, went slack. He heard it too, or didn't hear it. His eyes scanned the trees around us. "Weird," he muttered. But he didn't sound concerned, just curious. We stood there for a full minute, maybe two, just listening to nothing. It was the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. You start to hear your own heartbeat. I could feel the sweat trickling down my back, but it felt cold now. The air itself felt heavier, thicker to breathe. That's when I saw it. It was about 50 yards away, just on the other side of a small creek bed that cut through the property. At first, my brain tried to make it into a tree. We were in a mix of hardwoods and pines, and there was a big, dark trunk of a black walnut tree right where I was looking. But there was something next to it, something that wasn't a tree. It was a shape, tall and dark, just standing there. It was behind the tree, like it was peeking out, but it was so big that most of it was visible. It was just standing, motionless. I didn't say anything. I just lifted my arm, my finger pointing, my mouth suddenly dry as dust. My cousin followed my gaze. I saw his body tense up. He saw it too. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. His voice was tight. I shook my head. I couldn't process it. A bear? Ohio has black bears, but they're rare, and they don't stand up like that for long. And this thing was tall, way taller than a man, and it was uniformly dark. A blackish brown like wet bark. It was just this massive, vertical presence in the middle of the woods, perfectly still. We were frozen. The four-wheeler's engine had cooled down, so there was no noise from it either. It was us and this thing, in this dead, quiet forest, having a standoff. I could feel the fine hairs on my arms and the back of my neck standing straight up. A cold dread was seeping into my stomach, a feeling I'd only ever felt once before when I almost rolled a tractor. It's the feeling of your body knowing something is terribly wrong before your brain has caught up. Then it moved. It wasn't a big movement. It was just a slight shift of its upper body, turning its head a fraction. But that tiny movement changed everything. It confirmed it was alive. It confirmed it was looking at us, and in that shift, its full height became terrifyingly clear. It had to be 8 feet tall, maybe more. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, and it was covered head to toe in what looked like long, shaggy, dark hair. My cousin didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he dropped the machete, its blade sinking into the soft earth, and his hand went to his hip. He carried a Glock 19 in a hip holster. I carried a Smith & Wesson .357 revolver on my belt. We both drew our pistols at the same time. The sound of the leather holsters scraping, the metallic clicks as we both instinctively thumbed off the safeties. Those were the only sharp sounds in that oppressive silence. We didn't aim, not really. We just held them up, pointed in the general direction of the thing. Our arms were shaking. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack one. I was breathing in short, shallow gasps. We were locked in a stare with this thing. Its face. I couldn't see any details from that distance. It was just a dark patch under what might have been a heavy brow, but I could feel its gaze. It was an intelligent gaze. It wasn't the dumb stare of a deer or the angry glare of a cornered animal. It was a calculating, observing stare. This lasted for maybe 10 seconds. It felt like an hour. My mind was screaming, a jumble of half-formed thoughts. Bigfoot. No, that's stupid. What is it? What is it? Don't move. Don't you fucking move. And then it ran. It didn't run at us. Thank God. It didn't run at us. It turned its body and ran perpendicular to us, to our left, following the line of the creek bed. But the way it moved, I will never forget the way it moved. It ran completely upright, on two legs. It didn't drop to all fours like a bear or an ape. It ran like a man, but a man 7 feet taller and 400 pounds heavier than any man who ever lived. And it was fast, unbelievably fast. Its legs ate up the ground with these huge, powerful strides. The sound was what truly broke me. It wasn't just footsteps. It was a crash, a violent, tearing crash through the underbrush. It wasn't carefully moving branches aside. It was plowing through them. I saw saplings, young trees maybe 3 inches thick, just snap. They didn't bend. They snapped like dry twigs. Crack, crack, crack. The sound echoed through the silent woods, each snap like a gunshot. It was demolishing the forest as it ran. I could hear the thick, wet sound of its feet hitting the soggy ground near the creek, the splashes, the sound of its heavy body displacing air. We just stood there, guns still held out, watching this dark giant tear a path of destruction through the woods. It covered that 50, 60 yards in a handful of seconds, a blur of dark hair and raw power, and then it plunged into the swampy area at the far end of the property. The crashing sounds continued for a few more seconds, growing fainter, and then they stopped too, and just like that, it was gone. The silence rushed back in, even heavier than before. My ears were ringing, my arm, still holding the heavy revolver, was aching with tension. I slowly lowered it. My cousin did the same. We looked at each other. His face was white, his eyes wide with pure, unadulterated shock. I'm sure I looked the same. We didn't speak. We just stood there, breathing hard, listening. The normal sounds of the forest did not return. It was still that awful, suffocating quiet. After what felt like 5 minutes, my cousin finally nodded his head toward the direction it had run. We both knew we had to look, we had to see. We moved forward slowly, cautiously, our pistols still in our hands, held low but ready. We crossed the creek, our boots sinking into the mud, and walked to the spot where we had first seen it. There was nothing there, no prints in the dry leaves where it had been standing. It had been on solid ground. But we followed the path of its run. It was a wreck. It looked like a miniature tornado had touched down. The underbrush was flattened. A path about 4 feet wide was just gone. Thorns and ferns were smashed into the dirt. And the saplings. I walked over to one. It was a young maple. It was snapped clean in half, about 4 feet off the ground. The break was fresh, oozing sap, white wood exposed. The top of the tree was lying a few feet away. I looked at another one. Same thing. Snapped. These weren't twigs, they were trees. You would need a good amount of force or a tool to break them. This thing had just run through them. We followed the trail of destruction. It led straight into the swamp. The ground got soft and our boots started sinking in past our ankles. We could see where it had plowed through the cattails and reeds, creating a dark, watery lane into the deeper, thicker part of the swamp, where the water was probably knee-deep or more. We stopped at the edge. We weren't going in there. No way. We just stood there, looking at the broken path leading into the murky water. The swamp was silent too. No frogs, no insects, nothing. That's when the fear really set in, the deep, lasting kind. The adrenaline was wearing off, and I started to feel cold and shaky. My hands were trembling. We backed away from the swamp's edge, keeping our eyes on the tree line, our guns still out. We backed up all the way to the four-wheeler. We didn't turn our backs on those woods until we were on the machine and I had the engine started. The roar of the engine was a welcome sound. We didn't say a word the whole way back to the truck. We just drove, bouncing over the rough trail, both of us constantly scanning the trees. We loaded the four-wheeler onto the trailer in a frantic hurry, our heads on a swivel, expecting to see that dark shape step out from behind a tree at any second. We never went back to that land without a weapon, not ever. Even just to check a trail camera, one of us would go with a rifle. We were convinced, absolutely convinced, that we had seen a Bigfoot. There's no other explanation that fits. A bear doesn't run on two legs like that. A man in a suit doesn't snap trees like matchsticks. A hoax doesn't silence an entire forest. The lease ran out the next year and we didn't renew it. I still think about that day all the time. I think about the silence. I think about the way it moved, so fast and so powerful. I think about the sound of those trees breaking, but most of all, I think about that stare, that feeling of being seen, of being studied by something that was so much bigger and stronger than us, something that belonged in those woods in a way we never could. I never saw it again, but I know it was there, and sometimes, when I'm in the woods near my own house and everything goes quiet for a second, my heart jumps into my throat and my hand twitches for the gun that isn't on my hip anymore. Story 14. All right, so I've been sitting on this for years, and I guess I just need to get it out there. I don't talk about it much because, well, people look at you a certain way. But this place seems like maybe some of you will get it. I'm not some crazy conspiracy guy. I'm just a guy who spent a lot of time in the woods, and I saw some things, heard some things that don't fit into any box I've ever found. It all really started back in 1984. I was in my early 20s then, and me and my buddy, we were inseparable when it came to fishing. We'd go out to Meadow Grounds Lake in Pennsylvania any chance we got. This one night, it was a Friday, I remember, because we'd both gotten off work and just wanted to unwind. The air had that cool, damp feel you get in late September. Not quite cold enough for a heavy jacket, but you could see your breath if you stood still. We got to the lake just as the sun was dipping below the tree line. The water was like glass, a perfect dark mirror for the first few stars starting to poke through. We set up on our usual spot, a little gravelly bank on the south side, away from the main parking area. We had our cooler of cheap beer, our tackle boxes, and a couple rods. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet that settles deep in your bones. For the first few hours, it was just us, the occasional plop of a lure hitting the water, and the distant sounds of the woods settling in for the night. We weren't talking much, just enjoying the silence and waiting for a bite. That's why the first sound stood out so much. It started with the dogs. Now there are hunting cabins and game lands all around that lake. Hearing a dog bark isn't unusual, but this was different. It wasn't just one dog, it was a chain of them, one after another, starting way off to the west and moving fast like a wave. Woof, woof, woof! It was a panicked, urgent kind of barking, the kind that makes the hair on your arms stand up. It wasn't a random chorus. It was sequential, like something was running a straight line through the woods, and it was moving fast, setting off each dog as it passed their property. My buddy looked at me, his fishing rod frozen in mid-cast. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. We both just listened. The barking moved eastward along the game lands, getting more frantic, and then, as quickly as it started, it stopped. The silence that fell was heavier than before, thick and unnatural. It was the kind of quiet where you realize you're holding your breath. The lake was dead still, no crickets, no frogs, nothing. We looked at each other, and I saw my own unease reflected in his face. We didn't say anything. We just stood there listening to nothing, and then the sound came. It started low, a rumble that seemed to come up from the ground itself, vibrating through the soles of my boots. It built in a second into this roar. But it wasn't a bear. I've heard bears. This was different. It was louder than anything I'd ever heard in the woods, loud enough that I felt it in my teeth. And the worst part was the edge to it. It's hard to describe a sound, but this one had a metallic, shrieking quality to it, like tearing sheet metal mixed with the deepest, angriest bellow from some animal I couldn't even imagine. It echoed across the valley, bouncing off the hills, so you couldn't quite tell where it originated. It was everywhere and nowhere all at once. The fear that went through me was instant and total. It wasn't just being scared. It was a primal, gut-level terror that turned my legs to water. I dropped my fishing rod. I didn't mean to. My hands just went numb. My buddy stumbled back a step, his eyes wide as dinner plates. We were frozen, just two statues on a lakeshore, while this impossible sound ripped through the night. It probably only lasted 5-6 seconds, but it felt like an hour. When it stopped, the silence was even more deafening. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We just started grabbing our stuff, fumbling with the cooler, our movements jerky and uncoordinated. We didn't even reel our lines in properly. We just yanked them out of the water, the lures swinging wildly. We half walked, half ran back to the truck, our heads on a swivel, expecting to see something, anything, come crashing out of the tree line. We threw everything into the bed of the pickup, the metal clanging way too loud in the quiet. I scrambled into the passenger seat, and my buddy practically dove into the driver's side. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so bad he could barely get it in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and he slammed it into reverse, the tires spinning gravel behind us. We didn't say a single word the entire 20-minute drive back to town. We just stared straight ahead, the cab of the truck filled with the sound of our ragged breathing. I kept looking in the side mirror, expecting to see a pair of glowing eyes or some huge dark shape loping after us down the road. We got to his place, and we just sat in the driveway for a minute, not looking at each other. Finally, he just said, "What the hell was that?" I had no answer. We never went back to that spot at night again. I tried to rationalize it for years. A weird bear, a mountain lion, even though they were supposed to be gone from Pennsylvania. A prank, but nothing fit. That metallic edge, the sheer volume, the way the dogs had acted, it was all wrong. Then, 10 years later in 1994, something else happened that made me connect the dots in a way I really wish I hadn't. I'd gotten into rock climbing by then. It was a good way to stay in shape and be outdoors without being in the deep woods at night. One Saturday in early November, I was out by myself near Route 655 at a spot with some decent cliff faces. It was a crisp, clear day, the kind where the sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at. I was scouting a new route, walking along the base of the cliffs, looking for handholds, when I caught a whiff of something. It was that sweet, sickly smell of decay. Not overpowering, but definitely there. I figured a raccoon or something had died nearby. I kept walking, and then I saw the first one. It was a deer, a decent-sized doe, just lying in a small clearing between the rocks. It was on its side, and at first glance, it looked like it was just sleeping, but it was too still. I moved closer, my climber's sense of caution kicking in. That's when I saw the wound. Its abdominal cavity was wide open, but it wasn't a mess. That's what struck me first. It was clean. The cuts looked precise, almost surgical. The skin and muscle were peeled back in neat flaps, and the organs were gone. Just gone. There was almost no blood on the ground around it. It looked like someone had performed an operation on it and then just walked away. There were no signs of a struggle, no torn-up earth, no drag marks. It was just lying there, empty. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. This wasn't right. I stood up and looked around, and that's when I saw the second one. About 30 yards away, another deer, a buck this time, in the same condition. Same clean, precise opening, same missing organs, same lack of blood or struggle. My heart started thumping hard against my ribs. I walked a bit further, my eyes scanning the ground, and I found a third. 3 deer, all within a 100-yard stretch, all killed and processed in the exact same bizarre way. This wasn't a bear. Bears make a mess. They don't do surgery. It wasn't coyotes or a mountain lion. They'd have dragged the carcasses, fought over them, left blood and fur everywhere. This was different. This was methodical, intelligent. The hair on the back of my neck was standing straight up. The bright sunshine of the day suddenly felt thin and cold. I felt exposed, like I was being watched. I kept turning in circles, my eyes straining into the shadows between the trees and boulders. I got out of there fast. I didn't even finish my climb. I went straight to my friend's house, the same guy from the fishing trip. He was still a hunter, spent more time in the woods than anyone I knew. I was babbling, trying to explain what I'd seen. He listened, his face getting more and more serious. When I finished, he was quiet for a minute. Then he said, "You're not the first. A couple other guys I know have seen that, over near 7 points, and up in the Tyadartan. They don't talk about it. Nobody wants to be the guy who says it." "Who says what?" I asked, though I think I already knew. He just looked at me. "You know what?" And I did. Lining up the two incidents, the terror of that roar in 1984 and the clinical, inexplicable deer deaths in 1994, it created a picture I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just some random animal. It was something that could move through the woods silently and swiftly enough to set off a chain of barking dogs for miles. Something that could produce a roar that defied any known biology. Something intelligent enough to kill with a precision that suggested a purpose, not just hunger. Something that left no trace. People throw around the name Bigfoot, and it sounds silly, like a campfire story. But when you're out there and you experience something that has no other explanation, the word stops being silly. It becomes the only word you have for the gaping hole in your understanding of the world. It's something that doesn't belong. Something that operates by rules I don't get. Something that's smart and stealthy and powerful. That feeling has never left me. It's a lingering unease, a deep-seated knowledge that the woods, the places I used to find so much peace, hold secrets I can't comprehend. I still go hiking, I still go fishing during the day, but I'm always listening, always watching the tree line, and whenever the woods go quiet for no reason, that cold fear from 1984 washes right back over me, as fresh as if it happened yesterday. I never saw it, I only heard it, and I saw what it left behind, and that was more than enough. Story 15. The morning started out perfect. It was one of those clear, bright July days where the sky is so blue it almost hurts your eyes, and the air smells like pine and damp earth. I packed a small backpack with a sandwich, an apple, a thermos of coffee, and my favorite book. I think it was some mystery novel I'd picked up at the library. I threw in my binoculars too because I liked bird watching, and headed out around 9 in the morning. The trail I chose was less maintained than the ones I usually took. It was overgrown in places, with ferns brushing against my legs and the occasional spiderweb catching on my face. I remember the silence out there. It wasn't complete silence, but the kind where you hear every little rustle and bird call, and it just feels peaceful. For the first couple of hours, I was lost in my thoughts, enjoying the crunch of leaves under my boots and the way the sunlight filtered through the trees. After about 2 hours of hiking, I stumbled upon this secluded lake I'd never seen before. It was like something out of a dream, crystal clear water surrounded by tall pines and birches with no signs of other people around. The surface was so still it looked like glass, reflecting the sky and trees perfectly. I found a flat rock near the shore that was perfect for sitting, so I dropped my backpack and decided to have an early lunch. I ate my sandwich slowly, savoring the quiet, and then pulled out my book. For a while, everything was normal. I'd read a few pages, look up at the lake, and just breathe in the fresh air. The water looked inviting, so I thought, why not take a quick swim? I'm a decent swimmer, and the day was warm enough that it seemed like a good idea. I stripped down to my underwear, I didn't have a swimsuit with me, and waded in. The water was colder than I expected, sending shivers up my spine, but after a minute, it felt refreshing. I swam out a little ways, maybe 20 feet from shore, just floating on my back and looking up at the sky. That's when I first felt it, this eerie sensation, like I was being watched. It started as a prickle on the back of my neck, the kind you get when someone's eyes are on you. But I brushed it off. I figured it was just my imagination, or maybe a deer or something in the woods. But the feeling didn't go away. It got stronger, like a weight pressing down on me. I rolled over and treaded water, scanning the shoreline. Nothing moved, but the silence felt heavier now, almost oppressive. Then I heard it, a strange, aggressive hollering sound coming from across the lake. It wasn't like any animal noise I'd ever heard, not a bear's growl or a coyote's howl. This was deeper, more guttural, and it had this human-like quality that made my skin crawl. It echoed over the water, and for a second I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The sound came again, louder this time, and it felt like it was directed at me. I didn't wait around. I swam back to shore as fast as I could, my limbs feeling clumsy and weak. I scrambled onto the rock, dripping wet, and grabbed my binoculars from my backpack. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped them. I raised the binoculars to my eyes and scanned the opposite shore, about 300 yards away. At first, I didn't see anything, just trees and more trees, but then something moved. A dark shape emerged from the tree line, and my breath caught in my throat. It was huge, way bigger than any person or animal I'd ever seen. I adjusted the focus, and that's when I saw it clearly. A creature standing waist-deep in the water. It had to be at least 9 feet tall, with clean, shimmering black fur that looked almost wet in the sunlight. What struck me most were the breasts. Distinct, women's breasts, like on a human female, but on this massive, ape-like body. I know how crazy that sounds, but I saw it as plain as I see my own hands typing this. The creature just stood there, not moving, for what felt like an eternity, but was probably about 10 minutes. It didn't make a sound now. It was just staring out over the water, and I had this gut feeling it knew I was there. I couldn't look away. My body was rigid, my muscles locked up with fear. I remember the cold seep of water from my wet clothes into the rock beneath me, and the way my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. The creature's fur wasn't matted or dirty. It looked almost glossy, like it had just been groomed. Its arms were long and powerful, hanging at its sides, and I could see the muscles ripple under the fur. Then, without any warning, it dove headfirst into the water. Not a splash or a struggle, just a smooth, silent dive that swallowed it up completely. I waited, binoculars still pressed to my eyes, expecting it to resurface. But it didn't. The water settled back into that glassy stillness, like nothing had ever been there. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe 15 minutes, just staring at the spot where it disappeared. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Was it a bear? No. Bears don't have breasts like that, and they don't dive like that. This was something else. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I packed up my things in a hurry, my hands fumbling with the straps of my backpack. I kept glancing back at the lake, half expecting to see the creature again, but there was nothing. No ripples, no movement, nothing. I decided to check the shoreline where I'd seen it, just to see if there were any signs. I hiked around the edge of the lake, my boots squelching in the mud, but I found no wet footprints, no broken branches, no evidence at all. It was like it had vanished into thin air. By this point, the sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees. I knew I had to get back to my car before dark, but the hike out felt like a nightmare. Every little sound made me jump. A twig snapping, a bird fluttering away. I kept feeling that intense sensation of being watched, stronger than before. It was like eyes were boring into my back, and I'd spin around, but there'd be nothing there. Then, about halfway back to the trailhead, I started hearing loud noises from the trees above me. Not just rustling, but heavy thuds and cracks, like something big was moving through the branches. I looked up, but the canopy was too thick to see much. Whatever it was, it sounded like it was keeping pace with me, jumping from tree to tree. I picked up my pace, almost running, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The noises didn't stop. If anything, they got louder, more aggressive, like whatever was up there was taunting me. I finally reached my car, a beat-up old sedan parked at the trailhead, and I fumbled with the keys, my hands still shaking. I threw my backpack in the passenger seat and slammed the door, locking it immediately. As I drove away, I kept checking the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see that creature chasing me down the road. But the woods just faded into the distance, and the sounds faded too. I drove for hours, not stopping until I was back in town, and even then, I couldn't shake the fear. I didn't tell anyone about what happened, not my family, not my friends. I was afraid they'd think I was crazy or that I'd made it up, so I kept it to myself, buried deep, but it haunted me. I'd have nightmares about that lake, about those eyes watching me. 15 years later, in the early 80s, I went back with a couple of friends. We camped near that same lake, and I told them a little about why I wanted to go there, but I didn't go into details. We spent 2 days there fishing and hiking, but we didn't see anything unusual. No sounds, no sightings, just a normal, peaceful lake. It was only later that I learned the lake was over 150 feet deep in some spots, and the local authorities had walled it off with fences and warnings, probably due to safety concerns or something. But to me, that just added to the mystery. What was down there? What did I see that day? To this day, I have no explanation. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a hoax. It was real, and it scared me to my core. Sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat, remembering that dive into the water, the silence that followed, and the feeling that something is still out there, waiting. I don't know what it was, but I know what I saw, and that's enough to keep me from ever going back alone. Story 16. It was one of those perfect late spring days that make you remember why you live in this part of the country. The kind of day where the air is warm but not heavy, and the sun feels like a gentle hand on your back. We'd been cooped up for what felt like forever. My wife and I both grinding through busy seasons at work, and our daughter, she's 6, was vibrating with that pent-up energy kids get. So we decided, spur of the moment, to pack a cooler and drive out to Miller's Point, this park about 20 minutes outside of town. It's not a fancy place, just a big grassy field that slopes down to a creek, bordered by a dense wall of woods on 3 sides. We'd been there a dozen times before. It was our spot. We got there around 2 in the afternoon. I remember the clock in the car said 2:07. We found a place not too far from the tree line, a good spot because it was halfway in the sun and halfway in the shade from these big old pine trees. I hauled the old red and blue checkered blanket out of the trunk, the one my mom gave us, and my wife started unpacking the food, sandwiches, a bag of chips, some of those juice boxes our daughter loves. The whole scene was just normal, perfectly, boringly normal. I remember kicking off my sneakers and feeling the cool grass between my toes. I remember the smell of pine needles and damp earth. I remember my daughter, let's call her Lily. She was so happy, just spinning in circles on the blanket, her little sundress flaring out around her. We ate, we talked about nothing. I tossed a tennis ball with Lily for a bit, and she chased after it with that uncoordinated, all arms and legs run that little kids have. My wife was reading a book, leaning back on her elbows, sunglasses on. I was just lying there, looking up at the patches of blue sky through the pine branches, feeling the sun on my face, half dozing. It was pure peace. That's what gets me now, thinking back. The absolute, total peace of it, right before everything flipped upside down. I must have closed my eyes for a few minutes, lulled by the warmth and the quiet. When I opened them, I did a quick scan. The parent thing. My wife was still reading. The blanket was there. The picnic basket was there. But Lily wasn't. A little jolt of adrenaline, the kind you get when you can't see your kid for 2 seconds, went through me. It wasn't panic yet, just that heightened alertness. I sat up, my heart doing a single hard thump against my ribs. I scanned the field. There were a couple other families further down, near the creek, but no little girl in a yellow sundress. Then I looked toward the trees. She was maybe 30, 40 feet away from me, right at the edge where the bright green grass gave way to the deep dark shadow of the woods. She was crouched down, looking at something on the ground, probably a bug or an interesting leaf. My shoulders relaxed. She was fine. I was about to call out to her, to tell her not to wander off, when my eyes, I don't know, they just tracked past her, into the woods, and that's when I saw it. It was standing maybe 15 feet behind her, half hidden in the shadows between two massive pine trees. At first, my brain didn't want to process it. It was like looking at one of those magic eye pictures. My mind was trying to make it into a stump, a weirdly shaped bush, a trick of the light. But it wasn't any of those things. It was tall. So damn tall. I'm 6 feet even, and this thing had to be at least 7.5, 8 feet. It was just standing there perfectly still. It was covered in hair, but it wasn't like a bear's fur. It was long, shaggy, and matted. The color, it was mostly a dark, rich brown, like wet earth, but there were these patches, especially around its chest and shoulders, of a rusty red-orange color, like old bricks or dried blood. It wasn't a man in a suit. I need to be clear about that. The proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long, hanging down past its knees. The shoulders were immense, hunched and powerful looking. I couldn't see its feet clearly, but the legs were thick, like tree trunks. The terror that hit me then wasn't the scary movie kind. It was a cold, physical wave that started in my gut and flooded out to my fingers and toes, turning them to ice. It was a primal, animal fear. My daughter, my little girl, was right there, my breath locked in my throat. I couldn't move. I was frozen, just staring, my brain screaming one word over and over, "Lily, Lily, Lily, Lily." My eyes were glued to its face. It was shadowed, but I could make out features. It had a heavy brow, and beneath it, these deep-set eyes. They weren't glowing or red or anything like that. They were dark, almost black, and they weren't looking at me. They were fixed on Lily, and the expression, this is the part that haunts me more than anything. It didn't look angry. It didn't look predatory. It looked sad. There was a profound, deep sorrow in its face, a longing. It was the look of someone watching something they could never have through a window. It was staring at my daughter with this unbearable melancholy. I finally managed to tear my eyes away from it and look at my wife. She had put her book down. Her sunglasses were off. Her face was bone white, her hand clamped over her mouth. Her eyes were wide with the same absolute horror I was feeling. She saw it too. This wasn't a hallucination. We were both seeing this impossible thing. I don't know how long we stayed like that, locked in that silent, terrified tableau. It could have been 3 seconds, it could have been 30. Time just stopped. The world had shrunk down to this patch of grass, the edge of the woods, my daughter, and that thing. Then Lily stood up. She turned around, following our line of sight. She saw it. My heart just about exploded. I was tense to sprint, to grab her, to put myself between her and that thing. But she didn't scream. She didn't run. She just tilted her head, curious. She wasn't scared, not even a little bit. She looked at it the same way she'd looked at the bug on the ground, just curious. She took a half step forward. A sound came out of me then, a choked, strangled gasp. I was sure it was going to reach for her, but it didn't. Its eyes shifted from Lily to me, just for a second. I saw its own face change. The sadness seemed to deepen, if that was even possible. It was like it knew. It knew it was causing this terror. It knew it didn't belong here. And then it moved. It didn't run. It didn't vanish in a blur. It turned with a slow, heavy grace that was terrifying in its own right, and it just walked away. It walked deeper into the woods. The way it moved, It was powerful. You could see the muscles working under that thick coat of hair. It didn't make a sound. No cracking twigs, no rustling leaves. It just melted into the shadows between the trees and was gone. The spell broke. "Lily!" My wife shrieked, her voice high and tight with panic. I was already moving. I ran, my bare feet slapping against the grass. I didn't feel the stones or the sticks. I scooped Lily up into my arms, holding her so tight she squeaked in protest. I was breathing in ragged, painful gulps. I could feel my entire body trembling. I kept my eyes glued to the spot where it had disappeared, half expecting it to come charging back out. My wife was right behind me, her hands clutching at my arm at Lily's back. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Oh my God, what was that?" I couldn't answer. I just held my daughter and stared into the woods. They looked normal again, just trees and shadows. But they weren't. They felt different now, they felt watched. "We have to go, now," I said. My voice was rough, unfamiliar. We didn't pack anything, we just left it all. The blanket, the cooler, the half-eaten sandwiches, my wife's book. I carried Lily and we half walked, half ran back to the car. My wife fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking so badly she dropped them twice. I kept looking back at the tree line, my heart hammering against my ribs. Nothing, just the quiet, peaceful woods. We got in the car. I slammed my door shut and hit the lock button. The sound of the doors locking was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. My wife started the engine and she peeled out of the gravel parking lot, spraying stones behind us. We didn't speak for the first 5 minutes. We just drove, both of us white-knuckling it, staring straight ahead. I could feel the sweat cooling on my back, making me shiver. Then, from the back seat, a small, quiet voice. "Daddy." I twisted around to look at her. She was sitting in her car seat, kicking her legs softly. She looked thoughtful. "Yes, sweetie?" "Who was the hairy man?" The question hung in the air. My wife's knuckles on the steering wheel went even whiter. We exchanged a look of pure, undiluted dread. What hairy man, honey?" my wife asked, trying to keep her voice light and failing miserably. "The big one in the trees," Lily said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He was looking at me. He looked sad. She said it with such simple, childish clarity. The hairy man. She wasn't afraid. She'd seen its expression too. She'd seen the sadness. We tried to talk about it when we got home, my wife and I, after we'd put Lily to bed. We were sitting at the kitchen table, cups of tea untouched in front of us, but we couldn't. What was there to say? We both saw it. We both knew what we saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person. It was something else. Something that shouldn't exist. The fear was there, sure, the gut-churning, life-altering fear, but it wasn't the only thing. That's what's so confusing. Wrapped up in all that terror was this melancholy, this profound, unsettling sadness. The way it looked at Lily, the way it just walked away, it didn't feel like a monster. It felt like a ghost, a lonely, ancient ghost. We never went back to Miller's Point. We never even talked about going back. That perfect late spring afternoon was just ruined. The memory of it is now permanently stained with those deep-set, sorrowful eyes and the silent, powerful shape half hidden in the shadows. It's been a few years now. Lily doesn't talk about the hairy man anymore. I think she's forgotten most of it, but my wife and I haven't. We don't talk about it, but sometimes I'll catch her looking out the window at the woods behind our house, and I'll see that same distant, unsettled look in her eyes. I know she's thinking about it too. We still go on picnics, but we go to open, busy parks in the middle of town, places with no tree lines, no shadows to hide in, and the whole time, even when I'm laughing and playing with Lily, a part of me is always watching the edges, always waiting, because I know now that the world is a lot bigger and a lot stranger than I ever thought, and that sometimes the things that watch us from the shadows aren't filled with rage, but with a sadness so deep and so old we can't even begin to understand it. And in a weird way, that's even scarier. Story 17. The road I take is Green Lake Road, a stretch I know like the back of my hand. It's the kind of road you drive without thinking. You know where the potholes are. You know the curve where the deer sometimes jump out. You just go on autopilot. It was a cold night, not freezing, but that damp Pennsylvania cold that gets right into your bones. My heater was chugging along, blowing lukewarm air, and I had some classic rock station on low, just for background noise. I remember the clock on my dashboard said it was just after 10. I was maybe 15, 20 minutes from my house in Levittown, almost home. The thing about Green Lake Road at night is the darkness. There are long stretches between streetlights, and the woods come right up to the edge of the asphalt. It's not like a deep wilderness, you know. It's Pennsylvania. There are houses back in there, but at night, with just your headlights cutting a tunnel through the black, it feels isolated, really isolated. I was coming around a gentle left-hand curve. My high beams were on, lighting up the road maybe a couple 100 feet ahead, and then something stepped out of the trees on the right-hand side. It didn't run, it didn't bolt, it just stepped, like it was crossing the street without a care in the world. My brain didn't process it at first. It was just a shape, a massive dark shape that was suddenly there, filling my field of vision. I remember my foot just slammed on the brake pedal before I even consciously told it to. There was this horrible screeching sound from the tires, and the car started to shimmy, the anti-lock brakes juddering under my foot. At the same time, I wrenched the steering wheel to the left to swerve around it. It was in those 2, maybe 3 seconds, as my car skidded and I fought for control, that I saw it, really saw it. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least 9 feet, maybe more. It was built like a power lifter, but taller than any man I've ever seen. Its body was covered in this dark brown hair, but it wasn't like a bear's fur. It was stringier, thicker, more like human hair. Like if you took a person's head of long, thick, wavy brown hair and covered their entire body with it. It was matted in places like it had been through brambles. It took 3 steps to cross the 2-lane road. 3 slow, deliberate, powerful steps. Its legs were long, and it moved with a kind of heavy grace that I can't really describe. It didn't hurry. It didn't even look at my car, which was skidding sideways, headlights sweeping across it, horn blaring because my arm had hit it during the swerve. It just ignored me completely. My car slid past it on the wrong side of the road, and for a second I thought I was going to spin out or go into the ditch. But the tires caught, and I straightened out, coming to a stop facing the wrong way. My driver's side now pointed back toward where the thing had been, and that's when it turned its head. It was already at the tree line on the left side of the road. It had just finished its 3rd step and was about to melt into the shadows, but it stopped, and it turned its head and looked right at me. Its face. It wasn't a gorilla's face. It wasn't flat. It had a structure, a prominence, but I didn't see a nose or a mouth. All I saw were its eyes. They were blue, a bright electric piercing blue. They didn't just reflect my headlights. They seemed to generate their own light. They glowed. Not like a cat's eyes, that's just a reflection. This was different. This was like looking into 2 tiny, intense blue flames, and they were intelligent. I know that sounds crazy, but you could feel it. There was a mind behind those eyes, a cold, ancient, focused intelligence. It looked right at me, and it felt like those eyes were burning a hole right through my windshield, through my eyes, and into the back of my skull. The stare lasted less than a second, but it froze me solid. My hands were locked on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even blink. Then it moved. It didn't run. It just vanished. One moment it was there, at the edge of the woods, and then it was gone. It moved into the trees with a speed that was just impossible. It wasn't a blur, it was just an absence. Like it was there, and then the space where it had been was empty. The darkness just swallowed it whole. Silence. The only sound was the tick-tick-tick of my turn signal. I must have hit it during the swerve, and my own breathing, which was coming in these short, ragged gasps. My heart was hammering in my chest, so hard I could feel it in my throat. I just sat there, staring at the spot where it had disappeared. The trees were just a black wall. There was nothing to see. I don't know how long I sat there. A minute? 5 minutes? Time just stopped. My brain was trying to catch up, to file what I'd just seen into some category that made sense. A bear? No. A person in a suit? Absolutely not. The size, the speed, the way it moved. And those eyes, those goddamn blue eyes. Fear started to wash over me, a cold, heavy wave that started in my gut and spread out to my fingers and toes. I was alone, on a dark road, and that thing was in the woods right there. What if it came back? What if there were more? I fumbled for the gear shift, my hand shaking so badly I could barely get it into drive. I didn't even think about turning the car around. I just hit the gas and drove down the wrong side of the road until I found a place to do a wobbly, panicked U-turn. My eyes were glued to the rearview mirror. Every shadow looked like a moving shape. Every tree stump looked like a crouching figure. The rest of the drive home was a blur of pure, unadulterated terror. I kept my high beams on, my knuckles aching from gripping the wheel so tight. I scanned the sides of the road constantly, my head on a swivel. Every time I passed a break in the trees, my heart would leap into my throat. I expected to see it again, standing there, watching me with those blue eyes. I pulled into my driveway and killed the engine. I didn't get out. I just sat there, listening. The normal sounds of my neighborhood, a dog barking somewhere, the hum of a distant highway, sounded alien and threatening. I kept looking into my own dark backyard, half expecting to see a massive, hairy shape standing at the tree line. Finally, I made a run for it. I unlocked my front door, scrambled inside, and locked it again, throwing the deadbolt and the chain. I went around the whole first floor, checking every window lock, pulling every curtain shut. I didn't turn on many lights. I felt like a target. I ended up sitting on my couch in the dark, just shaking. I couldn't sit still. I'd get up, peek out the front window, then sit back down. My mind was racing. What was that? What did I see? After a while, the initial shock wore off enough for me to feel stupid. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Maybe it was a bear with some kind of blue eye shine. But I've seen deer and raccoons in my headlights 100 times. Their eyes glow green or yellow, not blue, and they don't stand 9 feet tall. They don't move like that. I couldn't sleep. I just couldn't. So I did what anyone would do. I got my laptop and I started searching. I typed in Green Lake Road creature. Nothing. Levittown strange animal sighting. A few results about coyotes. Then I got more specific. I typed in big, tall, hairy creature, Pennsylvania. That's when the floodgates opened. I found forums, pages and pages of them. Normal-looking websites where people told their stories. And as I read, a cold dread, different from the initial fear, started to settle in my stomach. I wasn't alone. Person after person talked about seeing something massive and hairy in the woods of Bucks County. They described the same thing, huge, walking on 2 legs, covered in dark hair. They called it the Sasquatch, the Bigfoot. I'd always thought of that as a Pacific Northwest thing, a fun campfire story, but here were people, some from towns just a few miles from me, saying they'd seen it. They talked about the smell, a foul, musky odor. I hadn't smelled anything, but my windows were up. They talked about how quiet it was, how it could just disappear. They talked about the feeling of being watched by something ancient and intelligent. And then I found it, a post from 2 years ago. A guy talking about driving on Green Lake Road late at night. He described almost the exact same thing I saw, the slow walk across the road, the immense size. But his post ended with a sentence that made the hair on my arm stand up. He wrote, And just before it vanished, it turned and looked at me. Its eyes were a bright, glowing red eyes, not blue, but the rest was my experience. I kept digging, my heart pounding. I found another account, this one from a hunter who said he'd seen one from a tree stand. He said its eyes were a weird, yellowish green. Another person said dark brown, like a person's. So the eye color was different, but everything else, the size, the hair, the movement, the feeling it gave you, it was all the same. It was all the same creature. That's when the real horror set in. It wasn't just that I'd seen a monster. It was that this thing was real. It was living in the woods around my home. It had been seen by other people. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a mistake. It was an animal or something that science didn't acknowledge, but it was there. It was real, and I had looked into its eyes. The terror of that moment in the car came rushing back, but it was sharper now, more focused. It was the terror of knowledge. I knew I couldn't unknow it. I finally passed out from exhaustion as the sun was coming up. I slept for a few hours, but it was fitful, filled with dreams of dark trees and glowing blue eyes. In the days that followed, I was a mess. I was jumpy. I couldn't concentrate at work. I started taking the longer, busier route home, adding 20 minutes to my commute just to avoid Green Lake Road after dark. But even on the main roads, I'd catch myself staring into the wooded areas, my skin crawling. I told one friend, the one I thought would be most open-minded. I laid it all out, the whole story, trying to keep my voice steady. He listened patiently, and when I was done, he just smiled this pitying smile and said, "Dude, you were probably just tired. It was probably a big buck. You know how they can look weird in the headlights." I didn't tell anyone else after that. It's been a while since that night, but it hasn't faded, not even a little. The memory of those blue eyes is burned into me. It's like a brand. I still drive, I still live my life, but something fundamental shifted inside me. I don't feel safe in the woods anymore. I don't feel like we're at the top of the food chain. We're just living in their world, and most of the time, we're lucky enough not to see them. Every time I'm forced to drive down Green Lake Road at night, my hands get sweaty. My headlights sweep across the trees, and for a split second, every shadow looks like a massive, upright figure. I hold my breath until I'm past that curve, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a pair of bright blue pinpricks in the darkness, watching me go. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that it's still out there. Story 18. We left home in the dead of night, way before the sun was even a thought. I remember the hum of the truck's engine was the only sound, and I was bundled up in the passenger seat, half asleep, watching the blackness out the window. My dad was quiet, the way he always was on these trips. It was our thing. He'd wake me up, we'd load the gear, and we'd just go. No big speeches, just the road and the dark. We got to our spot while it was still full night. It was this rugged, open desert country, all sand and scrub, and these weird, twisted Joshua trees sticking up like skeletons in the moonlight. We parked the truck off this dirt track that was barely a road, just two ruts in the sand. The air was cold and so still you could hear your own heartbeat. We got our stuff out. My dad had his rifle. I had my little .22, and we just stood there for a minute, letting our eyes adjust. We were waiting for the dawn. That was always the best time for rabbits, he said, when it's that quiet grey light, just before the sun cracks over the mountains. So we waited. The sky started to lighten, from black to a deep, deep blue, then to a sort of washed-out grey. You could start to see the shapes of the hills, the big rocks scattered around. But it was quiet, way too quiet. Normally, by this time, you'd hear little rustles in the brush, maybe see a shadow dart between the creosote bushes. But there was nothing, not a single rabbit, not even the sound of one. My dad shifted his weight next to me. I looked up at him. He had this frown on his face, his eyes scanning the desert. "Weird," he muttered. Just that one word. It was the first time I'd ever been out here with him and not seen a single rabbit at dawn. It felt wrong, like the whole desert was holding its breath. The sun finally peeked over the horizon, throwing long, stretched-out shadows from every rock and bush. The light was flat and orange, and it made the sand look like it was glowing. Since there was nothing to shoot at, my dad just gestured with his chin. "Let's walk a bit," he said. "See if they're just spooked further out." So we started walking. The sand was soft, the kind that sinks under your boots. It was quiet except for the crunch of our footsteps and the soft clink of the shells in my pocket. We walked for maybe 10-15 minutes, not really talking, just scanning the ground and the brush, and that's when we saw them. The tracks. They were just there, in front of us, like they'd been stamped into the earth. 2 sets of them, side by side, going in the same direction we were. I stopped dead. My dad stopped a step ahead of me. He didn't say anything. He just stared down. They were footprints, but they were barefoot, and they were enormous. I mean, you have to understand, my dad was a big guy. 6'2", worked construction his whole life, had hands like slabs of meat. His boot print next to one of these things, it looked like a kid's print. One set of these tracks was just massive. It was easily 3 times the length of my dad's boot and wider than my whole torso. The toes were clearly defined, long and thick, pressed deep into the sand. The other set was smaller, but still huge, maybe twice the size of my dad's foot. It walked right alongside the big one. The weirdest part, the part that made my stomach just drop into my shoes, was how deep they were pressed. We were standing on soft, dry sand. Our own boots only sank in maybe an inch. These things, they were sunk in deep. I'm talking 4-5 inches deep, like whatever made them weighed a ton, a literal ton. I remember the feeling that went through me. It wasn't a thought, not really. It was a cold, hard certainty that just slammed into my brain. Bigfoot. I didn't even have to say it. I looked at my dad, and his face was pale, his mouth a thin, tight line. He was thinking the exact same thing. You just knew. There was no other explanation. No bear walks on 2 feet like that, and no bear has feet that look like a giant naked human's, and nothing is that big and that heavy. "Don't touch anything," my dad said, his voice low and tight. He sounded different, scared. I'd never heard him sound scared before. We just stood there for a long time, maybe a full minute, just staring at these 2 sets of prints walking along together, a parent and a child. The thought made my skin crawl. It was one thing to think of a monster. It was another thing to think of a family of monsters, just walking through the desert like it was a Sunday stroll. My dad took a step forward, following the trail with his eyes. "Let's see where they go," he whispered. So we started following them. We didn't talk. The only sound was our breathing and the sand under our feet. The tracks were so clear, so perfectly defined. You could see every ridge on the sole, the way the sand had pushed up around the heel. They walked in a straight line, purposeful, not meandering like an animal would. They went right between bushes, over little rises, never hesitating. We followed them for what felt like a mile, but was probably only a few hundred yards. My heart was hammering in my chest the whole time. I kept looking up, scanning the horizon, expecting to see some huge, dark shape standing there, watching us. But there was nothing, just the empty, silent desert. The tracks led us right up to an old, sagging, barbed wire fence. It marked the edge of the BLM land we were on. And on the other side of the fence was a paved road, 2 lanes of blacktop just sitting there in the middle of nowhere. And the tracks, they just stopped. Right at the fence line, the big one and the small one. They didn't turn, they didn't go through the fence. There were no broken wires, no marks on the other side. They just ended, as if whatever made them had simply vanished into thin air or stepped over a 4-foot-high barbed wire fence like it was a curb. We stood there, staring at the last prints and then at the empty road beyond. The absurdity of it, the impossibility, just made the fear so much worse. How do you explain that? How does something that heavy just stop? Where did it go? The camera, my dad said suddenly, his voice rough. I left the camera in the truck. Stay right here, don't move. I'm going to run back and get it. We need a picture of this. I didn't want him to go. I grabbed his sleeve. Dad. I'll be 5 minutes, he said, prying my fingers off. I promise. Just stand right here. Don't follow the tracks any further. Just wait. He gave me one last look. A look I'll never forget. A mix of fear and this fierce, determined excitement. And then he turned and started jogging back the way we came. I stood there by the fence alone. The sun was fully up now, beating down. It was getting warm. I could feel sweat trickling down my back, but I was cold inside. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just this thick, heavy silence that pressed in on my ears. I looked down at the last print. The big one. I remember squatting down, not touching it, just looking. The sand at the bottom of the print was packed so hard, I reached out a finger not to touch the print itself, but to the little ridge of sand it had pushed up. It felt cold, colder than the sand around it. I don't know why, but that detail has always stuck with me. The cold sand. I stood up and looked back the way my dad had gone. I could still see his figure, getting smaller in the distance. He was almost to the little rise we'd come over. I watched him crest it and disappear, and then I waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The sun felt hotter. I started to get a bad feeling, a twisting in my gut. He said 5 minutes. He should have been back by now. The truck wasn't that far. We hadn't walked that long. I started to get really scared, not just of the tracks anymore, but for my dad. What if he fell? What if he had a heart attack? What if something got him? Another 5 minutes. I was shifting my weight from foot to foot, my hands clenched into fists. I kept looking from the empty road to the empty desert behind me. The feeling of being watched was so intense, it was like a physical pressure on my skin. I felt like there were eyes on me from every direction, from behind every rock, from the shadows under the bushes. Finally, I saw a figure coming back over the rise. It was my dad, but he was walking slowly, not running, and he was coming from the wrong direction. He was way off to the left of where he should have been. When he got closer, I could see his face. It was pale and sweaty, and his eyes had this wide, confused look. I got lost, he said, his voice shaky. He sounded out of breath. I swear to God I got turned around. I was just going back the way we came, straight line, and all of a sudden nothing looked right. The truck was gone. I was just spinning in circles out there. In the open, it's all open. How do you get lost in the open? He was genuinely spooked. My dad, who could find his way through any forest, any canyon, had been disoriented in flat, featureless desert. He said it was like a fog had settled in his brain just for a few minutes, and when it cleared, he was facing the wrong way, and the truck was 100 yards to his left. He had no explanation for it. He'd forgotten the camera. In his panic to find his way back to me, he'd left it in the truck. We both looked down at the tracks. They seemed even more menacing now. It felt like they had done that to him, like whatever made them didn't want to be photographed, and it had reached out and messed with his sense of direction just long enough to stop him. "We're leaving," my dad said. His tone left no room for argument. "Now." We didn't follow our own tracks back. He just pointed in the general direction of where he'd finally seen the truck, and we started walking, fast. We didn't talk. We just walked, almost at a jog, both of us constantly looking over our shoulders. I kept my .22 held tight, my finger off the trigger but ready. It felt stupid, like bringing a squirt gun to a fight with a grizzly, but it was all I had. The walk back felt 10 times longer. Every bush looked like it could hide something. Every shadow felt like it moved. The silence was still there, this awful, watchful silence. When we finally saw the truck, it was like seeing a lifeboat in a storm. We practically ran the last 50 yards. My dad yanked the door open. I scrambled in, and he slammed his shut. He fumbled with the keys for a second before getting the engine started. He didn't even bother putting his rifle in the rack. He just laid it on the seat between us. He threw the truck in gear, and we bounced back down the dirt track, kicking up a huge plume of dust behind us. Neither of us spoke until we were back on the main paved road, heading toward town. We never went back to that spot. We never really talked about it much after that day either. It was just this thing that happened, this shared, unspoken terror. My dad would just get quiet if I ever brought it up, and then he'd change the subject. But I've never forgotten it. Not the size of those prints, not the way they just stopped at the fence, not the way my dad, the most capable man I knew, got lost in a place with no landmarks. It left me with this permanent feeling that the world is a lot bigger and a lot stranger than we think, and that there are things out there in the empty places, just walking around, leaving prints in the sand that we aren't ever supposed to see. And sometimes, for a second, you get a glimpse, and it changes you forever. You're just left with the prints and the silence and the cold feeling in your gut that never really goes away. Story 19. I still remember that day like it was yesterday, even though it was back in 1965 or 66. Somewhere in there, when we were living by the levee in California, right near Pescu's restaurant. It's one of those things that sticks with you, you know? The kind of fear that digs deep and never really lets go. I was just a kid then, maybe 9 or 10 years old, and life was simple in a lot of ways, but that area had its weirdness. Immigrants used to gather at this old shack not far from our place, and there was always something going on. People talking, laughing, sometimes arguing. It was a community, but it felt isolated, like we were on the edge of something wild. That morning I woke up early, the sun barely peeking through the curtains. My mum was already up, puttering around in the kitchen, and I could smell coffee brewing. We didn't have much, but we got by. A few days before, my mom had shown off her new .22 Ruger rifle to some of the folks at the shack. She was proud of it, said it was for protection or maybe hunting if we needed it. One of the men borrowed it to go after rabbits, and for a while it was fine. But then rabbits started disappearing from the racks where people dried them, and things got tense. There was a fight. My dad got beaten up pretty bad over it, and he was sore and quiet for days after. I remember feeling scared and confused, like the world was shifting under my feet. So that day, I decided to go up the levee again. I'd been up there the day before and seen a rattlesnake curled up in the dirt, and it freaked me out. But kids are curious, right? I couldn't stop thinking about it, the way it just sat there watching me. My mom had warned me to stay away from the levee after the fight, but I was itching to see if anything else was up there. Maybe part of me wanted to prove I wasn't scared, or maybe I was just bored. Either way, after breakfast, I slipped out the back door when no one was looking. The levee was this big grassy mound that separated our neighborhood from the wider open areas and the river beyond. It was always kind of eerie up there, quiet, with a lot of cottonwood trees casting long shadows. The air smelled damp and earthy, like wet soil and decaying leaves. As I started climbing, I could feel the grass tickling my legs through my pants, and the sun was getting warmer on my back. I remember hearing birds chirping somewhere, but it was muted, like the place was holding its breath. I took my time, kicking at stones and looking around. The ground was uneven, with patches of mud from recent rains, and I had to watch my step. My heart was beating a little faster than usual, probably from the climb, but also from nerves. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something following me. The memory of the rattlesnake was fresh in my mind, how it had rattled its tail when I got too close, and I'd backed away slowly, my skin crawling. Today, though, everything seemed calm, too calm. When I reached the top of the levee, I paused to catch my breath. The view stretched out. On one side, our little cluster of houses and Pescu's restaurant in the distance, and on the other, nothing but open fields and trees leading toward the river. It was peaceful in a way, but it always felt like you were being watched. I walked along the ridge, my shoes squelching in the mud here and there. The cottonwood trees were thick in spots, their leaves rustling softly in the breeze. I remember thinking how alone I was, and for a second I almost turned back. But then I spotted something moving in one of the trees ahead. At first, I thought it was a big bird or maybe a branch swaying. But as I got closer, my steps slowed. There was this huge shape sitting in the crook of a cottonwood tree, maybe 20 yards away. It was dark and bulky, and it was swinging its leg back and forth like it didn't have a care in the world. My brain took a second to process it. This wasn't an animal I recognized. It was monkey-like, but way bigger than any monkey I'd ever seen in pictures. Its body was covered in dark, shaggy hair, and it had these broad shoulders that made it look powerful. But what really got me were the features. It had a face that was almost human, with deep-set eyes and a prominent brow, but it was all wrong, like something out of a nightmare. I froze right there on the spot. My mouth went completely dry, like I'd swallowed sand, and I couldn't move my legs. It was like my body had shut down on me. The creature was just sitting there, swinging its leg, and it hadn't noticed me yet. Or maybe it had, and it didn't care. I could see the muscles in its arms flexing as it gripped the branch, and its size was staggering. It had to be 7 feet tall if it stood up, maybe more. The air around me felt thick and heavy, and I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, loud and frantic. I don't know how long I stood there, maybe a few seconds, maybe a minute, but it felt like forever. My eyes were locked on it, taking in every detail. The way its hair moved in the wind, the subtle shift of its head as it looked out toward the river. It didn't make any sound, but its presence was overwhelming, like a weight pressing down on me. I started to feel dizzy, and my hands were trembling. I wanted to run, but my feet were rooted to the ground. Fear had me in a grip so tight I could barely breathe. Then slowly, it turned its head toward me. Its eyes were dark and intelligent, and they seemed to look right through me. There was no aggression in its gaze, just this eerie curiosity that made my skin crawl. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead, and my stomach churned. This wasn't some story or myth. This was real, and I was standing there alone with it. My mind raced, thinking about the missing rabbits, the fight, all the weird stuff that had been happening. Was this connected? Had this thing been lurking around, taking things? The creature shifted on the branch, and the movement was so fluid and unnatural that I gasped. It swung its leg a little faster, and I could see its fingers, long and thick, almost like a person's, but covered in hair. It didn't make a sound, but its silence was deafening. I knew I had to get out of there, but I was paralyzed. My legs felt like jelly, and I could taste bile in the back of my throat. I thought about screaming, but what if that attracted its attention more? What if it came after me? Finally, something snapped inside me. I don't know if it was instinct or pure terror, but I managed to turn around. My body moved in slow motion at first. Then, all at once, I stumbled backward, almost falling, and then I was running. I didn't look back, I just ran down the levee as fast as I could, my feet slipping in the mud, branches scratching at my arms and face. I could hear my own ragged breaths, and every part of me was screaming to go faster. The world blurred around me, and all I could think about was getting home, getting to safety. I didn't stop until I reached our backyard, my chest heaving, sweat pouring down my face. I burst through the door, and my mom was there, her eyes wide with alarm. I was crying and shaking, and I couldn't get the words out at first. When I finally told her what I'd seen, she went pale. She mentioned the missing rabbits again and said, "I told you not to go back up there." Her voice was tight with fear, and she hugged me close, but I could feel her trembling too. We never talked about it much after that, but the fear stayed with me, even when we moved away later because of the Juan Corona murders. That image of the creature in the tree never left me. To this day, I have no idea what it was, and I doubt I ever will.